Chapter 464. A beam of white light suddenly shot up from the great wall of burial sky. The next moment, the beam of white light tore through space and entered the spatial black hole. As never-ending sky disappeared, Mr. Bai and a Gui showed up where Yi Xian had been. Mr. Bai's face darkened when he saw Yi Xian disappear. "The other world?" a Gui asked. Mr. Bai nodded. "Let's go." He pulled with both hands, and the space in front of him tore apart. The next moment, the two of them disappeared. On the city wall, Dugu Xian hurriedly found Bai Xiaoxian. Bai Xiaoxian said softly, "Don't worry. The palace lord and Mr. Bai are already in pursuit." Dugu Xian's face was pale. "The other world?" Bai Xiaoxian nodded. Dugu Xian clenched her right hand. Her expression was as cold as water. No one knew what she was thinking. Bai Xiaoxian looked at Dugu Xian. "I've always been curious." Dugu Xian said softly, "What are you curious about?" Bai Xiaoxian looked at Dugu Xian. "I've investigated. All the information on Yi Xian can only be found when he was half a year old. Before that, there was only one name on his father. No, only one word, Yang. Am I right?" Bai Xiaoxian was silent. Dugu Xian smiled and said, "And the people of the Yi clan actually know nothing about him. If I'm not wrong, he might not be a member of the Yi clan. He's just hiding from something, or for some reason, the two of you placed him and his sister in the Yi clan. After all, the Yi clan has so many people and so many branches. It's easy to create the identity of an illegitimate child, right?" Dugu Xian said softly, "I'm afraid nothing in the never-ending starfield can be hidden from you, Miss Xian." Bai Xiaoxian shook her head. "There are many things I don't know. Take Yi Xian's father for example. Even though I used some special powers, I couldn't find out anything about him. And this Yang character of his was obtained from you." Dugu Xian looked at Bai Xiaoxian. Bai Xiaoxian said with a smile, "When you were captured by the Dugu family, you said one word. That was it." Bai Xiaoxian was silent. Dugu Xian said softly, "His father should not be an ordinary person, right?" Dugu Xian shook her head. "When I first met him, he was just an ordinary person." Bai Xiaoxian said softly, "Understood. You don't know his background either." Dugu Xian turned to look at the spatial crack in the sky and said softly, "I just want him to be safe now." Bai Xiaoxian said, "Don't worry, the other side forcefully kidnapped people in front of Palace Master this time. They will definitely suffer Palace Master's wrath." Dugu Xian looked at the crack in the sky without saying anything. Bai Xiaoxian also looked towards the crack in space. She frowned slightly. After so many years, have the people forgotten how terrifying Palace Master is? At this moment, Yi Xian found himself in a space cage. This space cage was shuttling through space at an extremely fast speed. Yi Xian was about to break it by force when Soul suddenly said, "Young master, don't move. You are currently shuttling through space at a high speed. This speed is not something you can bear. If you break it by force, you will be the first to die." Yi Xian's face sank. "So, I can't do anything now?" Soul hesitated for a moment and said, "Young master, why don't you cry? You will feel better if you cry." Yi Xian's face twitched. This Soul, at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly noticed that a space door had appeared in front of him. At the same time, he felt a powerful force attacking him from behind. The people from the Great Wall of Heaven. Yi Xian was delighted. At this moment, the space cage that imprisoned him instantly sped up. In an instant, he flew directly into the door of light, and the door instantly closed. At this moment, Wei Yang Tian rushed over. Just as the door was about to disappear, Wei Yang Tian stretched out his right hand and grabbed. Boom! The door that was about to disappear was directly grabbed by Wei Yongtian. In the next moment, she pulled to both sides, and the closed door was pulled open by her. Then, she disappeared on the spot. At this moment, Mr. Bai and Agui arrived. The two looked at each other, and Mr. Bai said softly, "She is angry." Agui nodded slightly. Kidnapping people in front of her. Has the foreign land gone mad? Mr. Bai shook his head. I'm afraid it's not that simple. At this point, he seemed to think of something, and his face changed. Not good. This may be a trap. Their target is most likely not Yi Xian, but Palace Master. As soon as he finished speaking, he disappeared on the spot. At the same time, his voice came from afar. I will go to the foreign land. You go back and open the formation. On the spot, Agui turned and disappeared. After an unknown period of time, Yi Xian felt himself coming to a stop. He glanced at his surroundings. He was now on an altar, surrounded by 4 towering pillars. On the pillars, some unknown beasts were drawn. These beasts had ferocious faces and were glaring ferociously, as though they were about to devour anyone they saw. There was not a single person around him. Yi Xian frowned slightly. What was going on? At this moment, he suddenly turned around. The space in front of him suddenly trembled violently. Soon, the space split open, and a woman walked out. Seeing the woman, Yi Xian was stunned. He pointed at the woman and said in shock, "You." The woman walked up to Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian coldly, and then looked around. After a while, a cold smile appeared on her lips. So your target is not him, but me. At this moment, an illusory old man suddenly appeared on one of the giant pillars. The old man looked down at endless sky. Palace Master Endless, the foreign land does not want to be enemies with the never-ending star region. As long as the Palace Master hands Yi Xian to us, we will leave immediately and never step into the never-ending star region again. Endless Sky looked at the old man coldly. If not for the Moke clan's support, would the foreign land dare to lure me here? As she spoke, she looked around. Since when did the Moke clan become cowards? At this moment, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in the air. The middle-aged man smiled. Palace Master Endless, long time no see. Endless Sky's expression was cold. MOU, so many years have passed. Do you still only know how to play tricks like this? The middle-aged man named MOU smiled. Palace Master Endless, intelligence is also a form of strength, isn't it? Endless Sky nodded. Then let me see your so-called strength. With that, she stomped her right foot. Boom! The entire altar shook violently. Behind her, Yi Xian felt dizzy, and his head almost exploded. However, there was nothing wrong with the altar at all. Endless Heaven's beautiful brows knit together slightly when she witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, MOU suddenly smiled and said, Palace Master Endless, we're all aware of your strength. So, how could we possibly prepare a one for you? Palace Master Endless, at this moment, Endless Sky suddenly said, you talk too much. With that, she punched at MOU from afar. Boom! The space around MOU instantly shattered. At the same time, MOU instantly retreated thousands of feet away. Just as Endless Sky was about to attack again, the old man on the pillar suddenly stomped his right foot. Activate the array. With that, the entire pillar shook violently. Immediately after, a light screen suddenly appeared, trapping Yi Xian and Endless Sky on the altar. Wei Yongtian raised his right hand and waved it gently. A powerful force swept out from his palm. This force was like a tidal wave that directly shook the light screen. Rumble. The entire altar started trembling violently. At the same time, the barrier of light exploded into pieces. However, right at this moment, the 4 pillars shook abruptly, and then the demon beasts inscribed on them suddenly came to life. In the next moment, those demon beasts pounced down towards Midnight Heaven, and for a time, all of them danced about wildly. Meanwhile, Yi Xian clearly felt the sky darken. Meanwhile, Endless Sky suddenly said, "Retreat! Retreat!" Yi Xian hurriedly laughed bitterly, "There's no place to retreat." Endless Sky frowned slightly. In the next moment, she appeared in front of Yi Xian. In the blink of an eye, she spread her right hand forward and slammed it upwards. Bang! At this moment, Yi Xian felt like the heavens and the earth were on the verge of collapsing. As soon as Endless Sky slammed her palm forward, shrill cries resounded in the sky. Especially the demon beasts at the front, they were instantly transformed into ashes, and the other demon beasts collapsed to the ground. However, the demon beasts on the 4 pillars seemed endless. All sorts of demon beasts kept appearing and pouncing towards Endless Sky. Endless Sky frowned slightly when she saw this, and then she stomped her right foot lightly. Bang! The entire altar shook violently, and then countless cracks appeared on it. However, Yi Xian spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. Endless Sky's frown deepened, and she held back a little. Meanwhile, Mou suddenly laughed, "Looks like you really care about him, Palace Master. You actually held back your strength. However, you might not know that the experts of my Moke clan are already on their way to the Great Wall of Heaven's burial. The longer you stay here, the more people from the Great Wall of Heaven's burial will die. Whether you protect the Great Wall of Heaven's burial, Never-Ending Starfield, or Yi Xian, it's up to you." Endless Sky said softly, "So your target is the Great Wall of Heaven." Mou smiled. "Of course. With you guarding the Great Wall of Heaven's burial, the Moke clan will have to pay a huge price to take it down. Therefore, this is the only way to lure you here. Once the Great Wall of Heaven's burial is breached, the Moke clan's army will be able to march straight into Never-Ending Starfield." Endless Sky nodded slightly. "That's a good idea." Mou narrowed his eyes and smiled. "Palace Master, whether you want to protect the Great Wall of Heaven's burial or Yi Xian, it's up to you." Endless Sky slowly closed her eyes, and her right hand clenched tightly. No one knew what she was thinking. Behind her, Yi Xian also fell silent. Outside, Mou's lips curled into an inexplicable smile. Everything was under control. The entire place fell silent. P.S. Happy May Day, everyone. Chapter 465. On the altar, the demonic beasts stopped as well, staring at Wei Yongtian and Yi Xian greedily, ready to attack at any moment. Wei Yongtian stood at the center of the altar, his eyes closed, his thoughts unknown. And Yi Xian was behind Wei Yongtian. After a while, Mou frowned when he saw that Endless Sky remained silent and didn't take any action. He stared at Endless Sky in the center of the altar. After a long time, he seemed to have thought of something, and his face changed. You're a clone." "Clone?" Wei Yongtian opened his eyes and looked at Mou, his lips curling into a mocking smile. "Seems like you're not that stupid after all." Hearing his words, Mou's face turned ugly, while Wei Yongtian's lips curled up. "Didn't you want to drag it out? Come, I'll accompany you." Mou glared at him coldly, before turning to leave. At this time, the old man on the pillar suddenly spoke up anxiously. "Brother Mou." Mou stopped, replying softly, "My apologies, I did not expect this." The old man's face darkened. "Are you going to leave just like that?" Mou laughed. "Of course not. Since my Moke clan has agreed to ally with the other side, we will not abandon our ally." As his voice rang out, a group of black-clothed men appeared around the pillar. There were about 20 of them, each of them wielding a black longbow, their arrows nocked. Mou spoke. "Brother Guyu, she's just a clone, your side should be able to deal with her." Furthermore, Yi Xian is on the altar. If you want my Moke clan to act, that's fine. However, my Moke clan wants half of Yi Xian's treasures. Gu Yu's face changed, as he looked at Mo, smiling. Brother Mo is right, she's just a clone, my Moke clan can deal with her. There's no need to trouble you. Mo nodded, I'm going to the Great Wall of Burial Heavens, take care, brother Gu. Gu Yu quickly replied, take care. Mo didn't say anything else and disappeared into the distance. After Mo disappeared, the black-clothed archers around the pillar also retreated. On the long pillar, the old man looked down at endless sky. Endless Palace Lord, I'll say it one last time. As long as you hand over Yi Xian, the foreign region will retreat immediately. We will never become enemies with Endless Star region. Wei Yang Tian coldly glanced at the old man, then looked at Yi Xian. Her right hand grabbed at Yi Xian from afar. With this grab, the space around Yi Xian began to condense. In the end, this space formed a barrier that protected Yi Xian. Seeing this, the expression of the old man on the pillar changed. Kill. At this time, Wei Yang Tian suddenly disappeared, and when she reappeared, she was already in front of a long pillar. Then, she slammed her palm on the pillar. Boom! The long pillar immediately shattered. For a time, the entire altar started to tremble violently. At the same time, countless demon beasts on the altar fell to the ground, and shrill cries resounded incessantly. Suddenly, a black shadow flew out from within Yi Xian's body. Emperor Hound. After the Emperor Hound emerged, it started to devour the demon beasts on the ground madly. Yi Xian, meanwhile, Wei Yang Tian had already appeared in front of a few other long pillars. It didn't take long for the pillars to shatter one after another, and countless demon beasts died miserably. As for the demon beasts, they couldn't get close to Wei Yang Tian at all. Especially now, when Wei Yang Tian attacked without any hesitation. The old man in the sky finally started to panic when he saw this scene. He hadn't expected Wei Yang Tian's clone to be so terrifying. This was just a clone. It didn't take long for the entire altar to shatter. However, the old man didn't hesitate to turn around and flee. In the sky, Wei Yang Tian stared coldly at the old man in the sky. Flee? I'm afraid you're dreaming. As soon as she finished speaking, she grabbed forward with her right hand and squeezed lightly. The old man's body shattered into pieces in the distant sky. Wei Yang Tian lowered her head to look at Yi Xian. Yi Xian spoke softly, Are you Wei Yang? Wei Yang Tian glanced coldly at Yi Xian, Go back. As soon as she finished speaking, she waved her right hand lightly, and the space in front of Yi Xian split apart. Yi Xian was just about to enter when the Emperor Hound suddenly said, Wait. Wait. Wait until I'm full. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth twitched when he heard this. Actually, he hadn't expected the Emperor Hound to suddenly awaken. After all, it had been in deep sleep until now. But that's fine. Having the Emperor Hound here is equivalent to having an extraordinary helper. Wei Yang Tian paid no further attention to Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound, and she just turned around and chased after them. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, but he didn't choose to follow her in the end. It would be utterly useless if he went over now, and he would only be a burden to her. As for the questions in his heart, he didn't choose to ask them now. However, if he wasn't wrong, then the Emperor Hound was probably the little girl he'd met in the sky world. Meanwhile, the Emperor Hound had finished devouring all the demon beast corpses that covered the ground. The Emperor Hound patted its stomach, and then it walked over to Yi Xian. It glanced at Yi Xian, and then it burped. Yi Xian was speechless. The Emperor Hound sized up Yi Xian, Kid, you've become much stronger. Yi Xian smiled, Let's go back first. The Emperor Hound suddenly said, Why? Yi Xian asked, why don't you go back? The Emperor Hound glanced at the surroundings, and then it said, I sense the aura of many demon beasts here. How about it? Are you interested in getting some? Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, Brother Emperor Hound, are you sure? The Emperor Hound nodded, very sure. Yi Xian grinned, that's exactly what I was thinking. Being captured by the Outlander territory was undoubtedly extremely grieving for him, and he was truly unwilling to return just like that. Let's do it. The Emperor Hound returned to the pagoda while Yi Xian concealed his aura with chaotic energy. It didn't take long for him to vanish on the spot. He naturally wouldn't fight the Outlander territory head-on. Moreover, with his chaotic energy concealment ability, unless it was a top-rate expert, otherwise, no one would be able to discover him. Moreover, Wei Yang Tian had clearly gone to look for trouble with the Outlander territory's experts, so this was the best time for him. It didn't take long for Yi Xian to chase after Wei Yang Tian. It didn't take long for Yi Xian to arrive before an ancient city. Explosions resounded from time to time in the sky above the ancient city, and even the heavens and the earth trembled. Sensing this scene, the corners of Yi Xian's eyes twitched. Needless to say, Wei Yang Tian was definitely fighting with the Outlander territory's experts. Yi Xian didn't care that much, and directly snuck into the city. It didn't take long for him to arrive before the largest palace in the city, and above the palace were 3 black bags, Deviant Soul's palace. Yi Xian quietly snuck in, and he didn't sense any powerful aura in the palace. Clearly, the Outlander territory's experts had been pinned down by Wei Yang Tian. Yi Xian hurriedly snuck into the palace, and began to frantically loot. About a quarter of an hour later, Yi Xian left the palace, and just as he was about to leave, the Emperor Hound suddenly said, "Go to the right." Yi Xian asked, "Why?" The Emperor Hound said, "There are demonic beasts over there." Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then snuck to the right. He knew that the Emperor Hound could devour these demonic beasts. It should be able to recover from its injuries, but the Emperor Hound's injuries shouldn't be completely healed. Soon, Yi Xian arrived before an altar, which was exactly the same as the altar he had been trapped on before, and these long pillars were painted with the shapes of countless monsters. Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Brother Emperor Hound, they haven't been released yet." The Emperor Hound said, "Stupid, can't I go in?" As soon as it finished speaking, a black light flew out from Yi Xian's chest, and this black light instantly sank into one of the long pillars, and soon, the long pillar began to shake violently. Yi Xian turned to look at the distant horizon, and now he only hoped that Wei Yang Tian would be able to cause more trouble, or the Outlander territory's experts would most likely discover this place, and then he and the Emperor Hound wouldn't be able to escape. At this moment, the Emperor Hound ran out, and Yi Xian's body had become slightly larger. Yi Xian was just about to speak, but the Emperor Hound had directly charged into another long pillar. Yi Xian's face darkened. This fellow is addicted to eating. At this moment, the distant horizon suddenly shook violently, and Yi Xian hurriedly turned to look at the horizon. In the sky, Wei Yang Tian held a bloody head in her right hand, and not far from her stood a grey-clothed old man, and 4 enormous black dragons floated around the old man. The old man looked at Wei Yang Tian, and besides iciness, there was also a trace of fear in his eyes. The old man stared fixedly at Wei Yang Tian. "Palace Mistress Wei Yang, our target is only that Yi Xian, why do you have to do this for him?" Wei Yang Tian suddenly raised her hand and waved, and the old man's expression changed, and he swiftly formed a seal with both hands. In an instant, the 4 enormous black dragons around him roared. Boom! 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 The surrounding space trembled, and it seemed like it was about to collapse. It was extremely shocking. A moment later, the sky returned to normal, and the grey-clothed old man had already retreated thousands of feet. The grey-clothed old man stared at Wei Yang Tian. "Palace Mistress Wei Yang, the Moke clan's powerhouses are already attacking the Great Wall of Burial Skies. If you don't go back, your main body's strength will not be at its peak. Are you really going to fight to the death with the old man here? Wei Yang Tian slowly clenched her right hand, but said nothing. The gray-clothed old man continued, Palace Mistress Wei Yang, if your main body was here, the old man would indeed not be your match. However, you're just a clone, so I'm afraid it won't be that easy to kill the old man. As for the Great Wall of Burial Skies, if your never-ending Starfield painters don't take action, who can stop the Moke clan's powerhouse? Wei Yang Tian suddenly waved her right hand, and the distant space trembled. The gray-clothed old man retreated rapidly, and this time, he retreated thousands of feet. Wei Yang Tian did not choose to continue attacking. She turned and disappeared into the distant horizon. As Wei Yang Tian left, she looked coldly to the right. After she completely disappeared, a light laugh suddenly rang out not far to the right. Impressive. As the voice fell, the space suddenly split open, and a man covered in black flames walked out. The gray-clothed old man walked in front of the flaming man, and said softly, Is this the Palace Mistress Wei Yang? The gray-clothed old man nodded, Yes. The flaming man said softly, Indeed very strong. The gray-clothed old man said, When will you attack? The flaming man shook his head, We've already informed the Void Spirit Star Palace. We're just waiting for their reply. As he spoke, he turned to look at the distant horizon. Our people should have already reached the Void Spirit Star Palace. In the distant starry sky, in a Star Palace hall, the Void Spirit Star Palace Master stared at the black-clothed man in front of him. Yi Xian? Are you sure? The black-clothed man nodded, Yes. He has that treasure on him. The Void Spirit Star Palace Master leaned back in his chair, and after a moment, he said softly, Don't joke around. I still want to live for a few more years. Chapter 466. The black-robed man frowned. What is the meaning of this, Palace Master Lin Su? Lin Su shook his head, Nothing. Go back. The black-robed man said solemnly, Palace Master Lin Su doesn't want the treasure? Lin Su smiled and said, Of course I want that kind of treasure, but, he waved his hand, You may leave. The black-robed man wanted to say something, but Lin Su frowned, You don't understand? The black-robed man didn't dare to say anything else and left. After the black-robed man left, a man walked in. It was Lin Songyun who had been to the firmament world. Lin Su shook his head, Why did those fellows provoke Yi Xian? Lin Songyun was taken aback, and then he said, Palace Lord, has the matter of Yi Xian possessing the treasure been completely exposed? Lin Su nodded, Almost all the surrounding starfields know. Lin Songyun's face sank, He's in big trouble. Lin Su shook his head, It's not just big, it's very big. Lin Songyun looked at Lin Su, What do you plan to do, Palace Master? Lin Su smiled, What plan? Just don't get involved. Lin Songyun fell silent. Lin Su smiled, You're thinking why we don't help? Lin Songyun nodded. Lin Su said softly, I, Fang Ciyuan, have also thought so. However, do you know who are the people and forces that are coveting his treasures this time? Lin Su said, Don't tell me they're involved as well. Lin Su smiled, All the powerful forces you know are involved. Now, we're the only ones left. Lin Songyun smiled bitterly, That fellow is really unlucky. Lin Su nodded, then he stood up and walked to the entrance of the hall. That senior, Lin Songyun suddenly said, Uncle, I have an idea. Lin Su said, Speak. Lin Songyun said, That senior's strength is beyond our imagination. It's very likely that she's from a Class 1 civilized starfield, or even a special civilized starfield. Since she cares about Yi Xian, she won't let him die. Lin Su frowned. Are you saying that she's training Yi Xian on purpose? Lin Songyun nodded his head. It's highly possible that's the case, and it's very likely that she's hiding in the shadows. At this time, if we lend a hand to that Yi Xian, we'll definitely be able to make her owe us a favor. Even if she doesn't owe us a favor, a friendship will do. A favor. Friendship. Lin Su suddenly clenched his right hand. The woman in the plain dress was so strong that it was unreasonable. If he could make her owe Spirit Void Star Palace a favor, it would undoubtedly be a great help to Spirit Void Star Palace. As Lin Songyun had said, even if there was no favor, a friendship would do. Thinking of this, Lin Su was a little tempted. But soon, he frowned. No, if we interfere, we will also be involved. Lin Songyun smiled and said, Uncle, we don't have to help them openly, but we can help them secretly, right? Lin Su was silent. Lin Songyun said, why not give it a try? Lin Su smiled and said, then you can lead them there. Lin Songyun said in a low voice, how many? Lin Su said softly, there's no point in bringing too many. The important thing is to bring the strong. Lin Songyun hurriedly said, bring the 12 celestial spirits? Lin Su nodded slightly. Let them go. They have never appeared before the eyes of the world. Even if they are discovered, they will be fine. As for you, you need to change your appearance. Lin Songyun nodded and was about to leave when Lin Su suddenly said, you can regret it now. Lin Songyun looked at Lin Su and smiled. I want to give it a try. Lin Su looked straight at Lin Songyun. You know, if you are exposed, I will not protect you. Lin Songyun smiled and said, I know, but I still want to give it a try, for myself and for Spirit Void Star Palace. Hearing this, Lin Su's heart softened and he said in a low voice, go. Lin Songyun turned and left. After Lin Songyun left, Lin Su suddenly said, the two of you follow him. If necessary, help him. Secretly, the two left. Lin Su looked at the distant horizon and said softly, why must you go and torment that brat? Isn't it better to be alive? Foreign domain. After Wei Yang Tian left, Yi Xian hurriedly called the Emperor Hound out, and then he dragged the Emperor Hound and ran. He could already sense that Wei Yang Tian had left. If he continued to torment him, then it would be pure stupidity. Although the Emperor Hound did not want to leave, Yi Xian did not allow it to do as it wished and forcefully dragged it away. However, he tragically discovered one thing. The door that endless heaven had torn open for him previously had disappeared. Disappeared. How do I go back? Yi Xian was dumbfounded. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. It was Wei Yang Tian. Wei Yang Tian glanced at Yi Xian. You haven't left yet? Yi Xian smiled sheepishly. Wait for you to come with me. Wei Yang Tian looked coldly at Yi Xian. Nonsense. With that, she waved her right hand and the space in front of her split open. In the next moment, she carried Yi Xian into the spatial crack. Soon, Yi Xian, the Emperor Hound, and Wei Yang Tian began to travel through space. Yi Xian hesitated, then asked, Wei Yang Tian was expressionless. Yi Xian said, the one I met in Azure Firmament World was you, right? Wei Yang Tian did not speak. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, Wei Yang Tian suddenly said, that treasure has recognized you as its owner? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Wei Yang Tian looked at Yi Xian. Do you know how many people are eyeing it now? Yi Xian smiled bitterly. I know. Saying this, he shook his head. Wei Yang, to be honest, I don't really want this thing. This treasure had brought him many benefits, but at the same time, it had brought him many disadvantages. If it were not for the plain-dressed woman suppressing this tower from the start, he would have been long dead. And now, the 5th floor was not a pushover. He did not know if he would explode on the spot one day. Wei Yong Tian looked at Yi Xian. Why? Yi Xian said in a low voice, this treasure is both a blessing and a curse, a great curse. If those people knew how dangerous this thing is, they would not come for it even if you beat them to death. From the beginning until now, the second floor's god, the third floor's Jian Zizai. These man and beast did not kill him at the start because of the plain-dressed woman, especially the second floor's god. This guy really wanted to kill him from the start. Apart from that, the tower had also trembled a few times. If it were not for the sword at the top of the tower, he would have been long dead. In short, he had survived until now because someone was protecting him and he was lucky. Although this was very hurtful, it was the truth. Wei Yong Tian said softly, this tower of yours does not belong to this world. Yi Xian nodded. It's not from our never-ending starfield. However, I do not know where it came from. Wei Yong Tian glanced at Yi Xian, then at the Emperor Hound. You are a monster from that endless purgatory? The Emperor Hound glanced at Wei Yong Tian and nodded slightly. It still respected Unending Sky, because Unending Sky was very strong, and it couldn't beat him right now. Wei Yong Tendo said, I went to that endless purgatory years ago. In the deepest part of it, there lived a powerful soul. As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. You have seen him? Yi Xian nodded. He knew that Wei Yong Tian was probably talking about the Netherworld King. Wei Yong Tian wanted to say something else, but at this time, she suddenly looked up. Not far away from them, a middle-aged man had appeared out of nowhere. However, this middle-aged man was illusory, not his real body. The middle-aged man smiled. Palace Master Wei Yong, it's been a long time. Wei Yong Tian said indifferently, Mo Tian Xing, are you going to stop me here? Mo Tian Xing smiled. Yes, please enlighten me, Palace Master. As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his palm, and a pitch-black mirror appeared in his hand. He formed a seal with his left hand and silently chanted an incantation. At this moment, Wei Yong Tian, who stood by Yi Xian's side, suddenly slapped her palm on Yi Xian's shoulder, and Yi Xian flew directly into the distance. Yi Xian was stunned. At this moment, Wei Yong Tian's voice resounded in his mind. Return to the Great Wall of Heavens immediately. In the spatial rift, Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then turned around and teleported into the distance. Teleporting was still a little taxing for him, but fortunately, he had the Space Dao Law, so he could just barely do it. Yi Xian sped up, and soon, a series of explosions came from behind him. Suddenly, the Emperor Hound said, Get on. Yi Xian leaped onto the Emperor Hound's back, and then it charged forward at an extremely swift speed. The Emperor Hound said, Kid, they seem to be trying to stop her clone from returning. Yi Xian nodded. Her clone is here, so her main body's strength is probably unable to reach its peak. That's probably their objective. His face fell when he spoke up to this point, I'm their objective on the surface, but they're actually trying to keep her busy. I can be said to have dragged her down this time. The Emperor Hound asked, How do you know her? Yi Xian replied, I met her in the mortal world. The Emperor Hound fell silent for a short moment, and then it said, I noticed that while you're as weak as a chicken, why are all the people you know so strong? Kid, were you a great expert in your previous life? Is that why you're so blessed in this lifetime? Yi Xian was speechless. At this moment, Soul suddenly said, Actually, the young mistress has many good points. Yi Xian hurriedly said, Don't say it, I don't want to hear it. Soul was puzzled. Why not? I feel that although the young mistress is very weak, she's really good to her family and friends. It's just that, her skin is too thick, so thick that I don't even know how to describe it. Yi Xian was speechless. Haha, the Emperor Hound suddenly burst into laughter. Yi Xian was about to speak, but at this moment, the Emperor Hound suddenly stopped. Not far in front of them stood a middle-aged man in a white robe. This person was the Holy Lord. The Holy Lord looked coldly at Yi Xian, and he was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly said, "Kill him. P.S. Sorry, I'm 10 minutes late today. Because there was an error in yesterday's article, I check it twice every time I update it. If there's an error, please post it in the circle, or contact me, I'll correct it in time." Chapter 467. As soon as Yi Xian's voice resounded, the Emperor Hound charged at the Hallowed Lord. Yi Xian held tightly onto the sword at his waist while he stood on the back of the Emperor Hound, and he was accumulating strength while waiting to attack. The Hallowed Lord's gaze gradually turned icy cold when he saw the Emperor Hound and Yi Xian charging at him. In next to no time, he raised his right hand slightly. In an instant, the space before him rippled like waves. At the same time, strands of powerful spatial energy surged incessantly towards the Emperor Hound and Yi Xian. The Emperor Hound and Yi Xian were getting closer and closer. In next to no time, Yi Xian suddenly leaped up, drew his sword, and slashed. The Emperor Hound was charging at the front, and this collision caused the space in front of it and Yi Xian to shatter. Yi Xian had successfully arrived in front of the Hallowed Lord, and he swiftly drew his sword. "Ohm!" The howl of a sword shook the sky. The Hallowed Lord gazed coldly at Yi Xian. He clenched his right hand slowly, and then he smashed his fist forward. At the instant that his fist shot forward, a strand of sword light silently arrived before him. This strand of sword light had appeared without a sound. The Hallowed Lord's expression instantly changed when he witnessed this scene, and he changed the direction of his fist to block above his head. Bang! The sword light slashed directly against the Hallowed Lord's fist, and the Hallowed Lord was pushed back a few meters. Meanwhile, the Emperor Hound had smashed directly into the Hallowed Lord, and the Hallowed Lord swiftly raised his hands to block. Bang! The Hallowed Lord was blasted 300 m away by the Emperor Hound's attack. As soon as the Hallowed Lord's figure stopped, Yi Xian had appeared in front of him, and then a strand of sword light slashed down towards the Hallowed Lord's face. The Hallowed Lord's expression suddenly became ferocious. In the next moment, he clenched his right hand into a fist and smashed it upwards. His fist was like an erupting volcano, and a powerful force forcefully shattered Yi Xian's sword light. However, a strand of flying sword had soundlessly slashed down towards the Hallowed Lord's head. A flying sword. Hiss! The strand of sword light slashed down from the Hallowed Lord's head. However, the Hallowed Lord's body didn't split into two like Yi Xian had. Instead, his body had become illusory, and then he'd appeared over 1 kilometer away. Seeing this, Yi Xian frowned. In the distance, the Holy Lord glared at Yi Xian and the Monarch Hound. His face was ugly to the extreme. He never imagined that he would be forced into such a corner by Yi Xian and the Monarch Hound. Just as the Emperor Dog was about to attack again, a black shadow suddenly attacked from behind. The Saint Lord turned around abruptly, and when he saw the figure, his face changed. He turned around and disappeared. Soon, a black figure appeared in front of Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound. It was a Gui. Yi Xian was about to speak when a Gui suddenly said, "Let's go back first." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Wei Yang, a Gui was taken aback by the way Yi Xian addressed him, but he didn't think too much about it and said, "They can't do anything to you. Come with me now." Yi Xian nodded, "Let's go." Soon, Yi Xian, a Gui, and the Emperor Hound passed through the spatial tunnel and returned to the Burial Sky Great Wall. When they arrived at the Burial Sky Great Wall, Yi Xian's face changed. At this moment, outside the Burial Sky Great Wall, there were several huge spatial teleportation arrays, and one could vaguely see a passage in them. On the city wall, Yi Xian looked at a Gui. "Senior, this is?" A Gui said in a low voice, "Spatial teleportation." The Moke clan's army will be teleported here through this spatial tunnel. Yi Xian said in a low voice, they still have an army? Ague looked at Yi Xian. The Moke clan isn't a single clan, it's made up of countless clans. As he spoke, he looked up at the horizon, and there were tremors from time to time. Yi Xian said, they're fighting? Ague nodded. Yi Xian was about to speak, but at this moment, a group of people suddenly appeared in the largest spatial teleportation array nearby, led by Mo Xia. Beside Mo Xia, Yi Xian also saw a familiar person, Mo Xia, who fought him before. Ague said softly, they're here. At this time, people appeared above the burial sky Great Wall. Yi Xian glanced at them. There were many familiar faces, and many unfamiliar faces. Clearly, Mr. Bai and Ague had summoned back the unending geniuses who were outside. At this time, Ague suddenly said beside Yi Xian, next is your battlefield. As he spoke, he quietly retreated. Yi Xian looked down. Clearly, it was the old against the old, and the young against the young. Neither side could afford to lose. If the older ones lost, such as Neverending Sky and the others, they would definitely die. If the younger ones lost, the Neverending Starfield would have no future. Moreover, the geniuses of the Moke clan would be able to enter the Neverending Starfield. When that time came, the old generation would be held back, and no one could stop them. Below, Mo Xia led Zuoqing and the others to the city wall, but soon, they rose into the air and came to the opposite side of the city wall, facing Yi Xian and the others from afar. Yi Xian noticed that apart from Mo Xia and the others, he also noticed the black-robed man who fought with him earlier. Ever since he appeared, his eyes had been locked on him. Yi Xian flashed his middle finger at the black-robed man. In the distance, the black-robed man was instantly enraged. He pointed at Yi Xian and said, Yi Xian, come out and die. On the city wall, Yi Xian leaped and came in front of the black-robed man. Yi Xian smiled and said, let me say this first. If you are afraid of death, get someone else. I really don't want to fight with someone who runs away after fighting. The black-robed man glared at Yi Xian. You are too arrogant, you. Yi Xian suddenly shook his head. If you want to fight, then fight. Don't talk so much nonsense. At the side, Zuoqing suddenly said, Brother Tsangyu, if you don't want to fight, then let me do it. As he said that, he walked out. The black-robed man named Tsangyu said in a deep voice, he is from the foreign land. Besides Zuoqing, Tian Sha suddenly said angrily, then hurry up and fight. If you don't fight, others will think that the Moke clan is afraid of Yi Xian. Di Sha, who rarely spoke, also nodded slightly. If you don't dare to fight, the Moke clan will do it ourselves. The black-robed man and the woman behind him had an ugly expression on their faces. Contempt. They could feel that the Moke clan and the Neverending Star region were looking down on them. The woman behind Tsangyu was about to attack, but Tsangyu stopped her. Let me do it. After saying that, he disappeared into thin air. When he reappeared, he was already in front of Yi Xian. Tsangyu looked at Yi Xian and was about to speak. At that moment, a ray of sword gleam came quietly. The sword gleam was silent like the air. When he felt the sword gleam, Tsangyu's expression changed drastically. He put his hands together and a black and blue shield appeared in front of him. The sword arrived. Boom! The shield shattered instantly. However, at that moment, Tsangyu took a quick step forward and threw a punch. On his fist, a powerful force swept out. At that moment, a ray of sword gleam arrived. Boom! The moment the sword and fist collided, Tsangyu retreated rapidly. In the process of his retreat, a ray of sword gleam quietly arrived. A flying sword again. Tsangyu's pupils constricted. He stomped his right foot and borrowed the power of space to stop himself. Forcing himself to stop, he slapped his chest with both hands. Boom! Song Yu's body trembled violently. Immediately after, a powerful aura swept out from his body. After this powerful aura appeared, the surrounding space instantly began to tremble. Everyone's gaze turned to this side. Zhuo Qing said softly, "Secret technique." Mo Xia nodded slightly. The people of this region are all good at secret techniques. It's a pity that there isn't any ancient secret technique. If there is an ancient secret technique, Zhuo Qing looked at Mo Xia. Mo Xia smiled. If it's an ancient secret technique, even I would have to be wary. In the distance, Song Yu's body grew bigger and bigger. In a short period of time, his body grew at least a few times bigger than before. At the same time, his aura was more than a few times stronger than before. Song Yu stared fixedly at Yi Xian. In the next moment, he charged towards Yi Xian. Every single step he took caused the space here to tremble violently. It was an extremely shocking scene. Yi Xian stood there silently with his sword in hand. When Song Yu arrived before him, Yi Xian suddenly leaped up, drew his sword, and slashed down. "Oam!" A sword howl resounded through the sky. A wisp of ridicule arose on the corners of Song Yu's mouth when he saw Yi Xian's sword slashing down. He smashed his fist forward, and the powerful force caused the space in an area of a few hundred meters to tremble as if it was on the verge of shattering. It was an extremely shocking scene. On the other hand, Yi Xian's sword continued to descend. However, his sword had suddenly transformed into the soul-suppressing sword. Boom! A figure was blasted flying. It was none other than Yi Xian. However, everyone was looking at Song Yu. After Song Yu blasted Yi Xian away with a punch, his soul was separated from his body. Not only that, but his soul was also fixed on the spot, unable to move. Song Yu's soul looked around in terror, and his face was filled with confusion. Everyone was also slightly confused. What's going on? In the distance, Yi Xian stood up. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and looked at Song Yu. Song Yu glared at Yi Xian. "What did you do to me?" Yi Xian grinned. He raised the soul-suppressing sword and said softly, "Withdraw." As soon as he finished speaking, Song Yu's soul directly turned into a black ray of light and entered the soul-suppressing sword. The entire place fell silent. Mo Xia and the rest also looked at Yi Xian. Zhuo Qing said solemnly, "What sword is that?" Mo Xia said softly, "It should be the legendary soul-suppressing sword. According to ancient records, this sword is the sword of the Nether clan's Nether King that disappeared. How did it fall into his hands?" Strange, as he spoke, he looked at Zhuo Qing. "If you fight him, be careful of this sword. It's extremely destructive to the soul. Although your physique is special, don't underestimate your opponent." Zhuo Qing nodded. "I understand." In the distance, after Yi Xian used the soul-suppressing sword to absorb Song Yu's soul, he turned around and walked away. Zhuo Qing, who stood beside Mo Xia, said in a deep voice, "I'll attack." As soon as he finished speaking, Mo Xia suddenly said, "Someone's coming." A voice suddenly resounded in the sky, "The Outlander isn't dead yet. It's not your Moke clan's turn to attack." As soon as the voice resounded, the space in the sky split open, and then a man holding a spear walked out. The man wore plain clothes, and the spear in his hand was wrapped in cloth. His eyes were as sharp as a knife. Mo Xia chuckled. "You're finally here." Chapter 468. In the air, the spear-wielding man slowly walked towards Yi Xian. Soon, he arrived in front of Yi Xian. He was about to attack when Yi Xian suddenly said, "I want to heal my injuries." Everyone, the spear-wielding man was also stunned. "Heal your injuries?" Yi Xian nodded. I was seriously injured in the battle with the Outlander geniuses just now. Are you trying to take advantage of me? Hearing this, the spear-wielding man's expression suddenly turned ugly. Am I, Yi Ji, the kind of person who would take advantage of others? You. Yi Xian hurriedly said, that's good. I'm leaving then. With that, he turned and left without any hesitation. Everyone, the man called Yi Ji was also a little dumbfounded. Obviously, he had not expected Yi Xian to do this. At that moment, a man appeared in front of Yi Ji. It was Zhou Shengsheng. Zhou Shengsheng glanced at Yi Ji and gently turned the spear in his hand. I play with spears. You play with spears too. Let's have a spar. Yi Ji said calmly, I'll keep you company. Zhou Shengsheng grinned. With a shake of his body, he directly charged towards Yi Ji. In next to no time, numerous explosions resounded incessantly. On the other side, Zhou Qing, who was beside Mo Xie, suddenly said, what now? Mo Xie smiled. Fight. Hearing this, the heaven fiends and earth fiends behind him flew to the opposite side. At that moment, two people suddenly flew out from the city walls. Soon, both sides began to fight. Meanwhile, Yi Xian had already returned to the stone house. He sat cross-legged on the ground, took out the purple source crystals, and began to absorb them crazily. The emperor dog had also entered the prison pagoda and was also digesting them crazily. In the prison pagoda, the only person who was relatively free was Xiaoling. She was now nurturing her spirit fruits and spirit trees every day, especially the third and fourth floors, which were filled with spirit trees. There was originally no one on the third floor, so naturally, it became hers. As for the fourth floor, after Jian Zizai left, it also became hers. However, the only thing she was afraid of was the fifth floor. Every time she went to the fourth floor to water the spirit fruits, she was very fast and would run out in no time. Seeing that Yi Xian was recuperating, Xiaolinger did not disturb him. She sat opposite Yi Xian and looked at Yi Xian with her chin resting on her hands. 2 hours later, when Yi Xian had recovered from his injuries, Xiaolinger hurriedly ran to him. Yi Xian gently rubbed Xiaolinger's little head. Are you worried about the fifth floor? Xiaolinger shook her head. I'm not afraid. Yi Xian smiled and said, I know, Xiaolinger is very courageous. Lil Linger blinked. Then, as if by magic, she took out a red fruit and handed it to Yi Xian. Eat it. Yi Xian took the fruit and looked at it. The fruit was crystal clear and exuded a strong fruity fragrance. At first glance, he could tell that it was not an ordinary item. Yi Xian took a bite. It was very sweet and crispy. Most importantly, he felt a wave of energy enter his body and then be absorbed by it. Good stuff. Yi Xian looked at Xiaolinger and said with a smile, thank you. Xiaolinger grinned, then turned around and went to the second floor with a few spirit fruits in her arms. Unknowingly, she had already regarded Yi Xian and the god on the second floor as her family. After Yi Xian finished eating the spirit fruit, he came to the side of the emperor hound. The emperor hound was lying on the ground, constantly exuding a powerful aura around its body. Yi Xian knew that the emperor hound should also be upgraded. It should be noted that it had devoured a lot of demon beasts in the foreign territory. The foreign territory. If this chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. Thinking of the foreign territory, Yi Xian quickly took out a storage ring. Inside the storage ring was the treasure he had obtained in the foreign territory. In fact, he did not obtain any good treasures in the foreign territory. He only obtained a few sacred weapons and a little more than 30 million purple origin crystals. Although he was a little disappointed, Yi Xian also knew that this was normal. After all, the really good treasures were definitely kept close to the person and would not be placed in the house. However, it was still better than nothing. Especially now, he also needed purple origin crystals, because every time he healed or broke through, he needed a huge amount of purple origin crystals. Yi Xian glanced at the Emperor Hound and did not disturb it. Just as he was about to leave, the god on the second floor suddenly said, "Come." Yi Xian looked up at the second floor, and the next moment, he directly appeared on the second floor. In the second floor, the god on the second floor said in a deep voice, "At most half a month." Yi Xian was puzzled. "What do you mean?" The god on the second floor looked at him. "At most half a month, the fifth floor will be able to come out." Hearing this, Yi Xian's face suddenly darkened. "Can you stop that guy?" The god on the second floor shook his head. "Not only can I not stop it, even Jian Zizai will not be able to." Bullsh *T. At this time, the Emperor Hound on the first floor suddenly said angrily, "What is the fifth floor? How can she not stop it?" The god on the second floor glanced down. "You know nothing about the power of the fifth floor." The Emperor Hound sneered, "You know nothing about the Protoss." At this time, the god on the second floor suddenly disappeared. Boom! A loud noise suddenly came from the first floor, and then Yi Xian heard the Emperor Hound wailing. Yi Xian shook his head. Although this Emperor Hound was very powerful, his intuition told him that the god on the second floor was even more terrifying. This was because the god on the second floor was locked up here, and in the entire Protoss, only Jian Zizai was qualified to be locked up here. This Emperor Hound provoked the god on the second floor, and it was asking for abuse. A moment later, the god on the second floor returned to the second floor. She glanced at Yi Xian. "Is there a problem?" Yi Xian quickly shook his head. "No problem." He did not forget that the god on the second floor had a hotter temper than Jian Zizai. The god on the second floor glanced coldly at Yi Xian. "In half a month, either you find the Dao rule or bring her back with that sword, or you will die." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Do I have no chance of winning?" The god on the second floor said calmly, "Tell me, what are your chances of winning?" "They can pinch you to death with one finger." Yi Xian was expressionless. "I can perish together with them." The god on the second floor said, "Detonate the World Prison Tower?" Yi Xian nodded. The god on the second floor looked at Yi Xian with pity. What will you use to detonate this tower?" "You can die 100 times, and this tower will not have a problem." Yi Xian's face sank. "So, if I die, this tower will not care about me, right?" The god on the second floor said calmly, "What do you think?" Yi Xian was expressionless. "Then I will give it away. I don't want it anymore." The god on the second floor twitched her eyes and shook her head slightly. "You can be considered a talent." Yi Xian. The god on the second floor said, "Do you really put all your hopes on others?" Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then said, "What can I do?" "You tell me. If I go to the fifth floor now, I won't be able to beat him. Anyway, I have decided. And then if I have to die, I'll fuck him as hard as I can, and, this chapter is not finished, please turn the page, the 7th, 8th, and 9th floor will be released, and everyone will have fun together." The god on the second floor looked at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian said seriously, "I really think so. Many times, many things could not be done by human strength." When faced with such a situation, Yi Xian made up his mind, that was to die together with everyone. Anyway, he had already prepared for the worst. After all, he really could not beat him. At least not now. And in the future. He was also very clear, it was very likely that there would be no future. The god on the second floor suddenly waved his hand, "Go out." Yi Xian turned and left. When he walked to the door, he suddenly stopped, then said softly, "Second floor god, you have helped me enough. You can leave at any time, really." After that, he disappeared at the door. He had always been grateful to the god on the second floor. Because the god had indeed helped him too much, and now, he really did not have the face to let him fight with the fifth floor. Because the fifth floor's target should be him and the tower. Therefore, if the god on the second floor wanted to leave, especially now, the fifth floor would definitely not target her. As for himself, he did not think too much. He was indifferent to life and death, and he would fight if he was not satisfied. After Yi Xian left the prison tower, he came to the burial sky Great Wall. At the moment, below, Yi Ji and Zhou Shengsheng were already fighting fiercely. Both of them were using spears, and the battle was extremely intense. On the other side, Sky Sha and Earth Sha were also fighting with two never-ending star region geniuses. These two geniuses Yi Xian had never seen before. They were two men, and both were extremely strong. However, they were completely suppressed by Sky Sha and Earth Sha, and could only defend passively. If this continued, defeat was only a matter of time. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then turned to look at Mo Xia not far away. This Mo Xia gave him a feeling that she was unfathomable. He had only felt this from some old monsters. As if sensing Yi Xian's gaze, Mo Xia suddenly looked at him. Seeing Yi Xian, Mo Xia smiled slightly. Behind Mo Xia, the red-haired woman suddenly said, "I will go fight him." Mo Xia frowned slightly. "Ah Feng." Hearing this, the woman stopped and looked at Mo Xia. "Are you afraid that I can't beat him?" Mo Xia shook his head. "You have other opponents. He is Zhuoqing's." As he spoke, he looked at Zhuoqing. Zhuoqing nodded slightly, then walked towards Yi Xian not far away. Ah Feng said coldly, "Can't you let me have him? I have been unhappy with him for a long time." Mo Xia said, "Think of the big picture." Big picture. Ah Feng humphed coldly and did not say anything else. In the distance, Zhuoqing walked in front of Yi Xian. He looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "Last time was considered a draw, right?" Yi Xian nodded slightly, "Yes." Just as Zhuoqing said, the last time, the two of them could only be considered a draw. Zhuoqing smiled and said, "Then this time, let's decide the winner." As he spoke, he slowly raised his right hand. In an instant, the spiritual energy between heaven and earth began to gather at this moment. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then looked up at Zhuoqing and smiled. "What's the point of deciding the winner? Let's fight to the death." Fight to the death. As soon as Yi Xian's voice fell, the sound of a sword soared into the sky, straight into the clouds, and shook the sky. P.S. I went out for a walk in the past 2 days. There are really a lot of people in the city. Also, I don't think it's suitable for me to play in my line of work because I have to carry a computer everywhere I go. End of this chapter. Chapter 469. At this moment, the gazes of countless people moved towards Yi Xian and Zhuoqing. Yi Xian walked towards Zhuoqing with his sword in hand. Zhuoqing opened his right hand, and a saber suddenly appeared in his grasp. The saber was over 1 m long, and its back was extremely wide. It seemed like a machete. At this moment, Yi Xian in the distance suddenly disappeared. At the instant that Yi Xian vanished, Zhuoqing slowly closed his eyes. In the next moment, he took a step forward and swung his saber with both hands. Hiss! Space was fragile like paper before this strike, and it was directly torn apart. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's sword arrived before him. It was a head-on collision. Bang! An explosion suddenly resounded, and then the space and the surroundings trembled violently. After that, both of them retreated explosively. At the moment that Yi Xian retreated, a ray of light silently flashed. Zhuoqing's expression instantly changed drastically. However, he reacted extremely quickly because he'd been prepared for it. So, he'd raised his saber to block it as soon as Yi Xian's flying sword had appeared. Bang! The flying sword arrived before him, causing his saber to tremble violently, and then Zhuoqing retreated repeatedly again. However, he hadn't even stopped when Yi Xian appeared in front of him once more. After that, he saw Yi Xian suddenly draw his sword. Zhuo Qing's eyes narrowed slightly, and he'd already thought of numerous ways to deal with it. But right at this moment, Yi Xian's sword left its sheath. Zhuo Qing's saber slashed horizontally. However, Yi Xian's soul had suddenly left its sheath as well. At this moment, it wasn't just one Yi Xian, but two. This sudden and unexpected event caused Zhuo Qing's expression to change, and he decisively chose to attack Yi Xian's body. However, Yi Xian's soul sword was even swifter, and it slashed towards his head. Zhuo Qing had no choice but to switch from offense to defense, and he raised his saber horizontally. Bang! The sword descended. Zhuo Qing retreated rapidly, and Yi Xian's soul had already returned to his body. At the same time, a flying sword pierced through Zhuo Qing's chest. When Yi Xian appeared in front of Zhuo Qing again, Zhuo Qing suddenly disappeared. Yi Xian suddenly turned around, and a broadsword slashed at his head. Yi Xian gently tapped the ground with the tip of his foot, and his whole body flashed 100 feet behind him. Zhuo Qing's saber still fell, and a saber chi flashed across the field like lightning. Yi Xian raised his sword and stabbed. Boom! The saber energy shattered with a loud bang. Opposite Yi Xian, Zhuo Qing glanced at her abdomen. There was a sword hole there, but it was healing at an extremely fast rate. Zhuo Qing looked up at Yi Xian, who was not far away, and said softly, "Your sword is really fast. Also, the combination of your soul and your physical body is indeed incredible." Yi Xian said, "Your physique is very special." Under normal circumstances, his sword could have taken Zhuo Qing's life. However, it seemed that Zhuo Qing was completely fine. Zhuo Qing smiled and said, "Let's continue." With that, he suddenly charged at Yi Xian with the long saber in hand. His speed became faster and faster, and when he arrived in front of Yi Xian, there was a row of afterimages behind him. That was because he was too fast. Soon, Zhuo Qing arrived in front of Yi Xian, and he slashed at Yi Xian with the saber in both hands. Annihilation. As the saber fell, a black saber light quietly condensed on the blade. In an instant, the space where the blade passed was directly shattered and annihilated. In front of Zhuo Qing, the ground beneath Yi Xian's feet suddenly began to tremble. Soon, an immeasurable amount of earth energy converged towards him. At the same time, the space energy in the surrounding space converged towards him like a tide. Soon, Yi Xian drew his sword and slashed. Hum! A sword hum shook the sky. Boom! The space around Yi Xian and Zhuo Qing was directly shattered. At the same time, Yi Xian and Zhuo Qing retreated rapidly, and as Yi Xian retreated, flying swords flew towards Zhuo Qing from a short distance away. These flying swords were extremely fast, and they were all aimed at Zhuo Qing's vital points. These flying swords were extremely fast, and they were all aimed at Zhuo Qing's vital points. In front of Yi Xian, Zhuo Qing retreated rapidly, and at the same time, the large saber in his hand kept slashing horizontally. At this moment, Yi Xian's figure trembled, and he directly rushed towards Zhuo Qing. As he rushed over, countless flying swords flew towards Zhuo Qing. On the other side, Mo Xia frowned slightly. Beside Mo Xia, the woman named Afeng said in a deep voice, "Zhuo Qing is being suppressed." As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. "This person's flying sword is so fast." Mo Xia nodded slightly. "In terms of speed, it's indeed not bad." As he spoke, he looked at Zhuo Qing with a trace of worry in his eyes. At this moment, a loud noise suddenly came from afar. As the loud noise resounded, Yi Xian and Zhuo Qing retreated rapidly. After Zhuo Qing stopped, a ray of sword light quietly appeared in front of him. Zhuo Qing's expression changed drastically, and he suddenly clasped his hands together. Boom! The clasping of his hands directly blocked a flying sword, but he was forced to retreat rapidly. At the same time, numerous flying swords pierced through his body, and one of them even pierced through the space between his eyebrows. As everyone watched, Zuoqing only stopped after retreating a full 300 meters. At this moment, Zuoqing's entire body was pierced by flying swords. Everyone's expression changed when they saw this scene. Flying swords. Fear. Deep fear. Even the woman named Ah Feng's eyes were filled with fear. Not only were these flying swords powerful, but they were also fast, making them impossible to defend against. At this moment, everyone suddenly looked at Zuoqing, and under everyone's astonished gazes, Zuoqing's body actually began to rapidly recover. Seeing this scene, the faces of the geniuses above buried Sky City immediately darkened. Was he unkillable? Yi Xian's expression was also somewhat ugly. Just now, his flying swords had struck Zuoqing's vital points, but even so, they still couldn't kill him? Was he really unkillable? Not far away, Zuoqing took a deep breath. At this moment, the sword wounds on his body had all healed, but his face was much paler. Zuoqing looked at the distant Yi Xian, and his hands slowly clenched. For a moment, the surrounding space began to tremble violently. In the distance, Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Little soul, do you know what kind of physique he has? Is it an invincible physique?" Little soul said, "I don't know." Yi Xian, at this moment, the god on the second floor suddenly said, "It should be the legendary immortal physique." Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. Is he really unkillable? The god on the second floor said softly, "Of course not. If I'm not mistaken, what you see now is not this person's true body." Not his true body. Yi Xian frowned slightly. What do you mean? The god on the second floor said, "What you see now is condensed from the qi of heaven and earth. Your sword can only consume him, but can't kill him at all. Unless you kill him more than 100 times and completely exhaust him to death." Yi Xian's face darkened. Damn, isn't this physique invincible? The god on the second floor said, "Your physique and bloodline are even more terrifying than his." Yi Xian was stunned, then asked, "What kind of physique do I have? Didn't Little Soul say that I have an ordinary physique?" The god on the second floor said, "Did I say anything?" Yi Xian, at this moment, Yi Xian found that the surrounding space began to tremble violently. Soon, the surrounding space cracked, and endless dark matter energy seeped out from these spaces. Seeing this, Yi Xian's face darkened. As if thinking of something, the Tao of space suddenly condensed between his eyebrows. The next moment, the surrounding space directly healed at the speed of an international card. Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian gently waved his right hand, and all the space in the field returned to normal. Everyone, opposite Yi Xian, Zuoqing looked at Yi Xian. His big move was gone just like that. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly walked towards Zuoqing with his sword. Zuoqing slowly clenched his right hand, and a powerful force condensed in his hand. Yi Xian suddenly leaped, directly above Zuoqing's head. The next moment, he held the sword with both hands and slashed at Zuoqing. Chi! As the sword fell, there was a sharp tearing sound. In front of Yi Xian, Zuoqing suddenly blasted a punch at Yi Xian. Break! The punch was thrown. Boom! The space in front of Yi Xian was directly shattered, and Yi Xian was knocked back. However, several sword flashes directly slashed at Zuoqing's body, and Zuoqing also retreated. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly rushed in front of him, and the next moment, sword flashes crisscrossed. Countless sword flashes wrapped around Zuoqing like a huge net. The two began to fight hand to hand, and a series of explosions sounded continuously in the field. Yi Xian knew very well that he had no way of finding Zhou Qing's real body. Therefore, he could only exhaust Zhou Qing to death. After the two began to fight in close combat, Yi Xian began to crush Zhou Qing in all aspects. Because of his soul separation and flying sword, Zhou Qing was beginning to be unable to block them. Just like that, Zhou Qing began to retreat. Not far away, Wuxia looked at Yi Xian and Zhou Qing expressionlessly. No one knew what he was thinking. Next to Wuxia, Feng said in a deep voice, "If this goes on, Zhou Qing will be exhausted to death by this swordsman." Wuxia did not speak. Feng stared at Yi Xian and Zhou Qing not far away. Her right hand slowly clenched, and she was ready to attack at any time. Above buried Heaven City, the faces of the war army and the others softened when they saw this scene. Below the city wall, Yi Xian and Zhou Qing were already wrapped in sword flashes. Within the sword flashes, a series of explosions sounded continuously. Just like that, after about 15 minutes, a loud noise suddenly sounded from within the sword flashes. Immediately after, the sword flashes exploded, and Yi Xian and Zhou Qing were separated. Just as Yi Xian retreated, a ray of sword flashed through Zhou Qing's throat. Chi! Zhou Qing's head fell directly. Everyone stared at Zhou Qing. Soon, under everyone's gaze, Zhou Qing actually grew a new head. Seeing this scene, the faces of the war army and the others suddenly became extremely ugly. She really could not be killed. Yi Xian stood quietly with his sword in hand. He was also covered in injuries, but he was not as terrifying as Zhou Qing, and his injuries would heal on their own. In the distance, Zhou Qing slowly clenched his fists, and the surrounding spiritual energy began to gather toward him. Soon, the surrounding space and ground began to tremble. Zhou Qing stared at Yi Xian. "You can't kill me." As soon as he said that, he slowly raised his right hand. In an instant, the surrounding spiritual energy swept toward Yi Xian like a river. Not far away, Yi Xian stood quietly. Suddenly, the space Dao Law quietly condensed between his brows. The next moment, under his control, the surrounding space began to collapse and annihilate inch by inch. Along with the collapse and annihilation, the surrounding spiritual energy also collapsed and annihilated, destroying the spiritual energy. Seeing this scene, Wuxia's expression changed. Feng was about to attack when Wuxia glanced at her expressionlessly. "They're fighting one-on-one, a fair duel." Feng's expression was a little ugly. "Are we just going to watch?" Wuxia said softly, "He can die, but he can't lose face." Feng suddenly said angrily, "I don't care. He's our friend. I can't watch him die." As soon as she said that, she rushed out. Wuxia frowned slightly. At this moment, Feng suddenly stopped not far away. He turned his head abruptly and saw a long saber cutting through the air from his right. Chapter 470. Feng's expression was cold as she punched out to the right. Boom! The saber was forced to a stop by this force. At this moment, a woman suddenly appeared behind the saber. Then, she grabbed the saber's hilt with her right hand and spun. Bang! Feng retreated over 30 meters. Feng looked at the woman in front of her. She wore a black dress, and on it was a lifelike black phoenix. The phoenix's eyes were like lightning, looking down on everything. Feng frowned. "Who are you? I've never seen you before." The woman ignored Feng and turned to look at the place where Yi Xian and Zhou Qing were fighting. At this moment, the battle between the two had already ended. The gazes of everyone present fell onto Yi Xian because he was the only one left there. Seeing this, Feng's expression turned savage. She charged at Yi Xian, but the woman in the black dress suddenly disappeared. Boom! With a loud explosion, Feng stopped on the spot. Ah Feng's expression turned savage. She clenched her fists and a powerful aura swept out from her body. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded out from behind her, "Stand down." Ah Feng turned and glared at Wuxia, "Watch him die." At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded out from behind Wuxia. Feng, hearing this voice, Feng was stunned. Everyone present was stunned as well. Everyone turned to look behind Wuxia, only to see a man walking out. This man was Wuxia. However, his face was extremely pale, without a single trace of blood, and he looked extremely weak. Ah Feng looked at Wuxia in shock. Wuxia said softly, "He's not dead yet." Then he looked at Yi Xian, who was not far away. "You won." In the distance, Yi Xian held his sword and supported himself on the ground. He looked extremely exhausted. Just now, he had used the Space Dao Law to frantically destroy the spirit energy within 300 feet of him. After the spirit energy was completely destroyed, he killed Wuxia's fake body with one slash. Just as he expected, without spirit energy, this fake body could no longer be revived. Yi Xian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and looked at the woman in the black dress beside him in surprise. He naturally recognized the person in front of him. It was Lian Wanli from the Azure world. He had never forgotten this woman. Lian Wanli laughed and said, "Is it that strange?" Yi Xian nodded. Lian Wanli smiled, "I heard you were here, so I came to look for you." Yi Xian was stunned. "Why are you looking for me?" Lian Wanli blinked. "Sure." Yi Xian asked subconsciously, "What are we playing?" Lian Wanli looked at Yi Xian. "What do you want to play?" Yi Xian was speechless. At this moment, Lian Wanli turned to look at Ah Feng, who was not far away. "Let's play." Ah Feng sneered, "I have the same intention." As soon as she finished speaking, she dashed out like an arrow. Lian Wanli smiled and charged forward with the Azure Dragon Saber in his hand. Boom! The woman named Ah Feng was instantly pushed back, but the next moment, she charged forward again. Seeing the two of them fighting, Yi Xian was somewhat shocked. Lian Wanli's strength was many times stronger than before. Very strong. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Actually, he was not the only one who had grown. While he was growing, others were also growing. At this moment, he thought of Mo Yunqi and company. He wondered how they were doing. But they should not be too bad. After all, he had given them quite a number of purple source crystals and good stuff. Mo Yunqi and company were not inferior to the people of the Heaven Domain. They were not inferior to the people of the Heaven Domain, the only thing they lacked was resources. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly turned his head. Not far away, Tian Sha and Di Sha had collapsed. On the burial sky Great Wall, the war army and company did not help. It was not that they were heartless. Here, the never-ending star field and the desolate race were abiding by a rule. In a duel, they were responsible for their own lives. Outsiders were not to interfere. In the past, the never-ending star field had killed many people from the desolate race, but the desolate race did not help either. Furthermore, they could not be saved. Because if one side helped, someone from the other side would definitely stop them. It was very cruel, but there was no other way. After looking at the two corpses on the ground for a long time, Yi Xian suddenly looked at Tian Sha. "Let's play." Tian Sha looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and said, "You were injured just now, and so was I. It's very fair." Tian Sha looked at Yi Xian and nodded. "All right." With that said, he charged straight at Yi Xian. At this moment, the distant Yi Xian suddenly turned around and left. Behind Yi Xian, Tian Sha was still charging. But as he charged, when he arrived behind Yi Xian, his head fell off. He fell down without a sound. Upon seeing this scene, everyone present was shocked. Not far away, Wuxia stared at Yi Xian with a deadpan expression. Just now, only a few people present had seen how Yi Xian had attacked, and he was one of them. Beside Wuxia, Zhuo Qing said in a low voice, "Impossible. Absolutely impossible." Wuxia said softly, "He used a mystic technique. That mystic technique made his sword move at least 5 times faster. Tian Sha cannot block that kind of speed." Zhuo Qing's expression was ugly. 5 times? Isn't that invincible? Wuxia looked at Yi Xian. He is very weak now. Anyone can easily kill him. Zhuo Qing was silent. Now was the time when Yi Xian was at his weakest, but they could not attack at this time. Because Yi Xian had already run away. Even if he did not run away, they would not attack. If they attacked now, the Moke clan would undoubtedly be looked down upon by the never-ending Starfield. The never-ending Starfield could afford to lose, but so could the Moke clan. At that moment, a loud sound came from not far away. Everyone looked over and saw the Moke clan woman named Xiaofan retreating rapidly. This time, she retreated a full 1,000 feet. The moment Xiaofan stopped, blood seeped from the corner of her mouth. Across from her, Lian Wanli glanced at Xiaofan and said with a smile, "Is my saber powerful?" Xiaofan stared at Lian Wanli. Lian Wanli gently stroked the hair by his ear with his left hand and said with a smile, "Are you not convinced?" Xiaofan laughed sinisterly. "I'm not convinced." Lian Wanli nodded. "I'll beat you into submission." As soon as she finished speaking, she charged at Xiaofan with her long saber in hand. Her speed increased, and everywhere she passed, space trembled. Xiaofang's expression gradually turned ferocious. She slammed her hands on the ground. Boom! The entire ground shattered. The next moment, an afterimage flashed across the battlefield. After this afterimage, countless afterimages followed. In the distance, Lian Wanli twisted his wrist, raised his saber, and slashed downward. "I'll kill you." The saber fell. Chi! Like a piece of paper, the space was directly torn apart. Xiaofan punched out with both fists and roared, "Break!" Boom! The surrounding space trembled, and in the next moment, a figure retreated explosively. This figure was Xiaofan. As soon as Xiaofan stopped, Lian Wanli, who was not far away, threw the azure dragon saber in front of him. Chi! The saber slashed across, tearing space apart. Shrill sounds rang out incessantly. Xiaofan raised her head to look at the saber. She sensed the power contained within it, and her face turned solemn. In the next moment, she clasped her hands together, and the space in front of her began to shrink, forming a thick spatial barrier in front of her. At this time, Lian Wanli's saber arrived. Boom! The spatial barrier trembled violently, and then began to crumble inch by inch. However, just as the saber broke through the spatial barrier, Feng suddenly clasped the azure dragon saber with both hands, and in the next moment, she slashed down along the saber with extreme speed. In an instant, she arrived in front of Lian Wanli, and then she used her hands as a saber and slashed towards Lian Wanli's abdomen. However, Lian Wanli was even faster. Before Xiaofang's hands could touch his abdomen, Lian Wanli's hands had already grabbed her by the throat. Under everyone's gazes, Lian Wanli grabbed Xiaofang by the throat and smashed her to the ground. Bang! The ground shook violently. In the next moment, Lian Wanli kicked Xiaofang's abdomen. Bang! Xiaofang's entire body flew hundreds of meters away, and then, Lian Wanli raised his right hand, head lift. As soon as he finished speaking, Xiaofang's head flew from her neck. Blood spurted out like a fountain. Lian Wanli glanced coldly at Xiaofang's corpse, and then he turned around and left with his saber. At the side, Mo Xia looked at Ah Feng's corpse, and after a moment of silence, he looked at Lien Wanli. At this moment, a loud sound came from the horizon. At this moment, everyone raised their heads to look at the sky. At this moment, they remembered that there was still a battlefield in the sky. Everyone looked at the sky. That was where the never-ending star field and the Moke clan's strongest fighters were fighting. If the victor was decided there, then everything would be settled. Because no matter how talented the prodigies on both sides were, they could not change the outcome of the battle. The sky trembled. Below, everyone was waiting. As for Yi Xian, he had already returned to the stone house. Recuperate. Right now, he only wanted to recuperate and then sleep. Because the battle with Zhou Qing had drained a lot of his energy, and in order to kill that Tian Sha, he did not hesitate to use his secret skill, and the secret skill would backfire. Right now, he was suffering from the backfire. His entire body was extremely exhausted, and he had no energy at all. It was as if his blood and marrow had been sucked dry. It was too uncomfortable. Absorb. Yi Xian began to absorb the purple origin crystal crazily. As the endless purple origin crystal energy entered his body, Yi Xian felt slightly better. At this moment, Lien Wanli walked in. Lien Wanli walked up to Yi Xian and sized up Yi Xian. She smiled and said, "You are much stronger than before." Yi Xian looked at Lien Wanli and smiled. "You too." Lien Wanli looked at Yi Xian and shook her head. "You didn't even tell me before you left Azure Firmament World. You are too mean." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "I left in a hurry." With that, he paused and hurriedly said, "By the way, why are you here?" Lien Wanli blinked. "I came to look for you." Yi Xian was a little puzzled. "Why are you looking for me?" Lien Wanli smirked. "Take a guess." Yi Xian hesitated and then said, "Miss Lien. Don't tell me you have feelings for me." Lien Wanli blinked. The next moment, she raised her right hand toward Yi Xian and said, "Head lift. P.S. Holiday is over. Work hard on writing." Actually, he did not really want to go out to play. He was forced to go out by his family. They said that staying in the house all day would cause mold. Home was more comfortable. Writing and watching movies was more comfortable. Chapter 471. Head lift. As Lien Wanli said that, Yi Xian's entire body was lifted up by her. However, his head was not separated. Lien Wanli held Yi Xian and said with a smile, "I have never seen such a thick-skinned person in my life." Yi Xian was speechless. Lien Wanli put Yi Xian down and said, "Let's fight after we recover." Then, she turned and left. Inside the stone house, Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. He had to admit that it was a good feeling to see old friends. At that moment, he missed Mo Yunqi and the others even more. He wondered how those guys were doing. After a while, Yi Xian collected his thoughts and continued to heal. After Lien Wanli left the stone house, she went to the city wall. At that moment, everyone was looking at the void in the horizon. Lien Wanli looked up and said softly, "The fight is really intense." At that moment, a loud sound came from the void. Then, under everyone's gaze, Mr. Bai and the others appeared in the sky. Mr. Bai was the leader, and behind him were Li Changfeng and the others. At that moment, Li Changfeng and the others looked extremely serious. Especially Li Changfeng. This was his first time fighting with a powerful Moke clan. His opponent's strength was beyond his expectations. Mr. Bai looked at a middle-aged man in front of him and said softly, "Mo, I don't think it's possible for you to conquer the never-ending starfield with your strength." The middle-aged man named Mo smiled and said, "Don't worry, it's just the beginning." At that moment, the space within tens of thousands of miles collapsed into a spider web. Everyone was horrified. Soon, under everyone's gaze, the space nearby suddenly split open, and a man and a woman appeared out of thin air. The woman was Wei Yong Tian, and the man was the leader of the Mok clan, Mo Tian Chi. Mo Tian Chi placed his right hand behind his back and looked at Wei Yong Tian expressionlessly. Wei Yong Tian's lips carried a hint of mockery. Mo Tian Chi, I originally thought that you and I would fight fair and square. I didn't expect you to collude with the other side to play this kind of trick. To be honest, compared to your father from back then, you are not just a little bit lacking. At the very least, he challenged me to the death. Mo Tian Chi remained expressionless. Just as he was about to speak, Wei Yong Tian suddenly punched out. Boom! The space around Mo Tian Chi shook violently. Then, Mo Tian Chi retreated nearly 1,000 feet. Just as Wei Yong Tian was about to continue, the space around her trembled violently. Following that, the space around her tore apart, as a number of black chains shot out, sealing the space around her. At the same time, 4 black-robed men appeared, each of them wielding a thick black tome in their left hand, and a black staff in their right. Seeing the 4 of them, the expressions of Mr. Bai and the rest changed. Sacred sorcerers. Hearing Mr. Bai's words, Li Changfeng frowned. What do you mean? Mr. Bai's expression turned ugly. The ultimate experts from the other side are proficient in all kinds of secret techniques and ancient secret techniques. The palace lord has a clone being held back. Saying this, he made a prompt decision. Attack. However, as soon as they attacked, Mo and the rest suddenly blocked their way. Mo grinned. Mr. Bai, it's better for you to stay here. Mr. Bai tilted his head. Wei on guard. As soon as Mr. Bai's voice fell, 4 black-robed men suddenly appeared not far behind Mr. Bai. The 4 black-robed men each held a giant sword in their right hand and a round shield in their left. Leading them was a Gui. Wei on guard, Wei on star. The most outstanding warriors nurtured by the other side. A Gui led the 4 people behind him and charged towards the 4 black-robed men in the sky. Not far away, Mo suddenly said, "Where is General Mo Ku?" As soon as Mo's voice fell, 9 experts wearing black armor and holding long spears suddenly appeared in front of a Gui and the rest. General Mo Ku. Mr. Bai's expression turned ugly. General Mo Ku was the most elite warrior of the Mok clan. In the past, the Mok clan's clan leader and 12 other General Mo Ku had blocked him and Wei Yong Sky. Opposite Mr. Bai, Mo laughed. Stay here. A Gui suddenly charged over with his scythe. The battle had begun. Mo glanced at a Gui, who was standing with General Mo Ku, and said softly, "A Gui can still fight." As he said this, he looked at Mr. Bai. Don't even think about it, Mr. Bai. This time, the Mok clan has made thorough preparations. Let's see if the invincible Wei Yong Palace Lord can hold on. Mr. Bai ignored Mo and looked at Wei Yong Sky in the sky. Wei Yong Sky was already wrapped in layers of black chains, and the 4 black-robed sacred sorcerers were muttering something. She glanced at her surroundings, and in the next moment, she punched out. Boom! The entire sky shook violently, and the black chains shattered. However, they were repaired in an instant. Suddenly, a strange aura was emitted from within the chains. As these auras appeared, Endless Heaven frowned slightly because she felt that her lifespan was rapidly depleting. Wei Yong Sky frowned slightly. Is this an ancient secret technique? As she said this, she glanced at the chains, which were covered with all sorts of strange runes. Wei Yong Sky sneered. Every chain is a creation realm treasure. An ancient secret technique coupled with so many creation realm treasures. I have to say, you guys have really put in a lot of effort to kill me. Not far away, the Moke clan's clan leader, Mo Tian-chi, said calmly, Weiyang Palace Lord's strength is extraordinary. We don't dare to underestimate you. Weiyang Sky slowly closed her eyes. The next moment, she slowly raised both her hands. The next moment, the surroundings began to shake violently. Seeing this, Mo Tian-chi narrowed his eyes. The four sacred sorcerers hurriedly chanted their incantations, and soon, a mysterious force appeared around Weiyang Sky. Weiyang Sky suddenly said softly, "Destroy." As she said this, she pressed her hands down lightly. As Weiyang Sky's voice fell, the space around her began to be destroyed. Seeing this, the expression of one of the sacred sorcerers changed. "Lend us a hand." As soon as the sacred sorcerer finished speaking, Mo Tian-chi waved his right hand. In an instant, an enormous black umbrella enveloped Weiyang Sky. The space beneath the black umbrella dimmed as if it was being corroded. At the same time, the space around Weiyang Sky suddenly began to shrink, and the speed of the destruction instantly dropped. However, it didn't vanish, and it just slowed down. Mo Tian-chi looked at the four sacred sorcerers. Faster. The four sacred sorcerers started chanting faster, and it didn't take long for the chains that trapped Weiyang Sky to start trembling violently. Moreover, even the heavens and the earth started to tremble. Moreover, countless mountains in the surroundings started to crumble. An ancient secret technique could cause the heavens and the earth to change. The expressions of Mr. Bai and the others darkened when they saw this. Weiyang Sky, who was surrounded, was extremely calm. She glanced coldly at the four sacred sorcerers, and then she suddenly opened her right hand. It didn't take long for countless bolts of lightning to appear in the sky above the great burial wall. In an instant, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the sky, and it seemed like the end of the world had arrived. Weiyang Sky suddenly raised her head and clenched her fist. Fall. Bang. Countless bolts of lightning rained down from the sky like a torrential storm. Mo Tian-chi's expression changed slightly when he witnessed this scene. In the next moment, he shot into the sky and raised his hands. For a time, countless strands of energy swiftly converged in the surroundings and formed a thick barrier that forcefully blocked the lightning. However, Mo Tian-chi's face gradually turned pale. Obviously, it was slightly strenuous for him. Meanwhile, Mr. Bai was about to attack, but a middle-aged man stood in front of him. Mr. Bai gazed at the middle-aged man. Mo Xiao. Mo Xiao smiled, "Mr. Bai, neither of us will be able to attack today." As he spoke, he gazed at Weiyang Sky. "My clan paid such a huge price, so she must die today." In the distance, within the black chains, the space around Weiyang Sky started to turn illusory. At the same time, her body also started to become blurry. Next to Weiyang Sky, a sacred sorcerer suddenly laughed sinisterly. "Weiyang Sky, my other world originally only wanted Yi Xian dead, but you protected her time and time again. You even invaded my other world and killed countless of our experts. Today, the old man will make you pay with blood." At this moment, the space behind the old man suddenly split open, and a woman walked out. The newcomer was none other than Endless Heaven's clone, and Endless Heaven's clone held a bloody head in his hand. This head belonged to the Moke clan expert who went to stop Weiyang Sky. Weiyang Sky's clone casually tossed the bloody head to the ground. In the next moment, she suddenly disappeared. The trapped Weiyang Sky suddenly closed her eyes. In the next moment, she suddenly opened her eyes and slapped her right hand to the right. Boom! The black chains shattered with a loud rumble. As for the four saint sorcerers, they were forced to retreat several hundred meters away from the impact. Retreat! One of the sacred sorcerers made a prompt decision and turned to leave. The other three also left immediately without any hesitation. Retreat? Not far away, Wei Yang Sky's lips curled into a mocking smile. She suddenly disappeared, and in the next moment, for shrill screams came from the horizon. Soon, Wei Yang Sky appeared again. Her gaze fell on Mo Tianqi, and the latter's expression changed. He was about to speak, but Wei Yang Sky raised her hand and slapped him. Boom! The space where Mo Tianxing was instantly collapsed, and he fell into the spatial black hole. However, at this moment, a hand suddenly appeared in the spatial black hole, and soon, Mo Tianqi was pulled out by this hand. At this moment, an old man appeared in front of Wei Yang Sky. The old man had a hunched back and held a wooden cane in his hand. He looked extremely old. Mo Tianqi, who was rescued by the old man, hurriedly bowed to the old man. "Greetings, Patriarch." The hunchbacked old man said softly, as she said, "You are indeed much weaker than your father." Mo Tianqi's expression turned ugly. The hunchbacked old man said, "If we want to conquer the never-ending starfield, we can only rely on ourselves. Do you understand?" Mo Tianqi hurriedly nodded and stood respectfully behind the old man. The hunchbacked old man's gaze fell on Wei Yang Sky. "Wei Yang, this time, you will lose to the younger generation." As he spoke, he looked down at Mo Xia. "It's time for you to make a move." Mo Xia smiled, then looked at Burial Wall. "Is there anyone from the younger generation of the never-ending starfield who wants to fight?" As he spoke, he paused, then said, "Why don't you all come at me together? P.S. There is one more chapter. Checking, updating immediately." Chapter 472. Attack Together. Along with Mo Xia's voice, the battlefield suddenly quieted down. Arrogant. One had to admit that Mo Xia's words were very arrogant. How could the people from Warring Sky Great Wall endure it? Soon, a man flew out from the city. However, Mo Xia suddenly disappeared at this moment. When he reappeared, his hand was already on the man's throat. Under everyone's gaze, Mo Xia's right hand tightened slightly. Crack! The man's head fell from his neck. Seeing this scene, the expressions of the people on Berry Sky Great Wall turned solemn. Instant kill. This was an instant kill. Mo Xia casually tossed the head to the ground and said softly, "Next." On the city wall, Zhang Tian and the others looked to the other side. There, Zhou Shengsheng was still fighting with the foreign genius. The two of them had been fighting for a long time, but a victor had yet to be decided. Meanwhile, Baldy was about to go down but was stopped by the war army. The war army looked at Baldy and shook his head, "Don't throw your life away." Baldy sighed softly, "What's worse than death is having no one go down." Saying this, he directly leaped off the city wall. However, at this moment, a figure flew over from the distant horizon. When everyone saw the person, they immediately boiled over. Soon, a white-clothed man appeared in front of Mo Xia. The man in white was around 20 years old. His clothes were as white as snow and spotless. In his hand, he held a silver spear. The tip of the spear flickered with a cold light. Shui Bai. There was another person behind Shui Bai. This person wore a black brocade robe and held a black folding fan in his hand. The corner of his mouth had a trace of demonic charm. Mo Xia looked at Shui Bai and said softly, "I've been waiting for you for a long time." Shui Bai looked at Mo Xia, "I heard that you're the #1 genius of the Moke clan." Mo Xia smiled, "It's just an empty title." Shui Bai said, "I hope you're not too weak." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly thrust his spear. The spear was as fast as lightning and couldn't be seen by the naked eye. However, Shui Bai's expression quickly changed. Because his spear was directly caught by Mo Xia's 2 fingers. Everyone stared at Wuxia. At this moment, the devilish smile on the face of the man in the brocade robe behind Wuxia disappeared. In front of Wuxia, Wuxia softly said, "If that's all you have, then I'm really disappointed." As soon as he finished speaking, his two fingers trembled slightly. Bang! The long spear shook violently and a powerful force swept towards Wuxia. Wuxia's expression didn't change. He pulled his hand back and used his palm to block the spear tip. Then, he pushed it forward. Boom! Two powerful forces erupted. At this moment, Wuxia dodged to the side, and a fist brushed past his face. When Wuxia was about to counterattack, the fist suddenly turned into a palm and shook to the right. Boom! The space within 1,000 feet of the square garden shook violently. When the space returned to normal, Wuxia was already 1,000 feet away. Seeing this scene, everyone's faces darkened. On top of the city wall, Lian Wanli's gaze landed on Wuxia. He said softly, "Very strong. Very strong indeed." Yi Xian's voice resounded by Lian Wanli's side. Lian Wanli looked at Yi Xian. "Are your injuries healed?" Yi Xian nodded. "They're almost healed." Lian Wanli nodded slightly, and then he looked at Wuxia. "This person is unfathomable." Yi Xian nodded. Although he hadn't fought with Wuxia before, he knew that Wuxia's strength was extremely powerful. If he wasn't strong, then Zhou Qing and the others wouldn't be willing to follow him. Now that he saw Wuxia attack, he was still slightly shocked because Wuxia's attack was very strange. It was slightly similar to a Gui from before. It was as if Wuxia knew what you were going to do next. Moreover, Wuxia's speed was extremely fast. Lian Wanli suddenly asked, "What are your chances of winning if you fight him?" Yi Xian replied, 100%. Lian Wanli turned to look at Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked down and said softly, "I'll release the 5th floor. All of you will die." Lian Wanli was speechless. At this moment, the Emperor Hound's voice suddenly resounded in Yi Xian's mind. "Big brother, do you think the 5th floor belongs to you?" Yi Xian was speechless. Below, Wuxia walked towards Wuxia. He walked very calmly, and there wasn't the slightest energy fluctuation coming from his body. Wuxia calmly looked at Wuxia. His right hand tightly gripped the long spear in his hand. When the two of them were 10 feet apart, Wuxia suddenly thrust his spear forward. In an instant, hundreds of Wuxia appeared on the battlefield. And these Wuxias all did the same action. They thrust their spears towards Wuxia in front of them. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian's expression suddenly turned serious. Because even he couldn't tell which of these clones was real and which was fake. Below, Wuxia slowly closed his eyes. In the next moment, he moved. In front of everyone's eyes, he began to throw a punch. His punch was very slow, but a strange scene appeared. The afterimages of Wuxia in front of Wuxia began to disappear one after another. In less than a quarter of an hour, all the afterimages around Wuxia had disappeared. On the city wall, Lian Wanli softly said, "Interesting." Yi Xian nodded, "There are many geniuses in this world." Before this, he felt that he was already very monstrous. At least among those of the same rank, it would be hard to find a match for him. But now, he realized that it wasn't that he was invincible among those of the same rank, but that he hadn't met anyone stronger. There is always someone better than you out there. Below, Wuxia looked at Wuxia who wasn't far away and shook his head, "I'm a little disappointed because you're still stuck on these illusions." As his voice faded, he suddenly disappeared. His speed was so fast that no one could see him clearly. Opposite Wuxia, Wuxia's expression changed. He thrust his spear forward with his right hand. The spear was like a dragon, and cold light flickered. At this moment, Mo Xie's fist landed on the tip of Shui Bai's spear. Boom! Under everyone's gaze, Shui Bai retreated rapidly. This time, he retreated into Berry Sky City. The place suddenly became quiet. In the air, the elder in front of Wei Yang Tian softly said, "Palace Master Wei Yang, how is my junior?" Wei Yang Tian looked at Mo Xie below. "Not bad." The hunchbacked elder smiled and said, "It's his honor to be recognized by Palace Master Wei Yang." Wei Yang Tian didn't say anything. She slowly closed her eyes. The battle between the Moke clan and the Never-Ending Star region wasn't just a battle between the older generation, but also a battle between the younger generation. Before this, the younger generation of the Never-Ending Star region didn't lose to the younger generation of the Moke clan. But now, Mo Xie's appearance had broken this balance. Who could stop Mo Xie? Below, Mo Xie slowly walked towards Shui Bai, who wasn't far away. He walked very calmly. Not far away, Shui Bai held his spear tightly in his right hand and remained silent. At this moment, Mo Xie suddenly stopped. Shui Bai lightly tapped the ground with the tip of his foot, and his entire body turned into a black line that shot out. Spear. The tip of his spear tore everything in its path. In the distance, Mo Xie stretched out his right hand and clenched it lightly. Trap. His voice fell. Boom. The space within a radius of a few hundred feet shook violently. Then, layers of space condensed and stacked on top of each other. In an instant, heaven and earth became distorted and illusory. Shui Bai stopped. He was forced to stop by the layers of space. At this moment, he was less than 10 feet away from Mo Xie, and his spear was only a few inches away from Mo Xie. At this moment, Shui Bai suddenly roared angrily and swept the spear in his hand. Boom! The surrounding space trembled violently, and the surrounding space began to crack. Mo Xie looked at Shui Bai, but he didn't show any signs of attacking. At this moment, Shui Bai suddenly leaped up and smashed his spear down at Mo Xie. Mo Xie didn't dodge, and he let Shui Bai's spear smash down. Under everyone's gaze, Shui Bai's spear directly hit Mo Xie's head. Boom! The surrounding space trembled violently, but Mo Xie was unharmed. On the contrary, Shui Bai's spear actually cracked. Seeing this scene, everyone's expression darkened. What is this? Shui Bai's eyes were also filled with disbelief. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Mo Xie took his attack head-on. How is this possible? Shui Bai stared at Mo Xie. The place was incomparably quiet. Everyone on the Burial Sky Great Wall was also silent. In the sky, Wei Yang Tian said softly, "Heaven and Earth Dharma Body." Opposite Wei Yang Tian, the hunchbacked old man smiled and said, "Palace Master Wei Yang has a good eye." Wei Yang Tian looked down, and no one knew what he was thinking. On the Burial Sky Great Wall, Little Soul's voice suddenly rang in Yi Xian's mind, "Young lord, this is a heaven and earth dharma body." Yi Xian frowned slightly, "What's a heaven and earth dharma body?" Little Soul said, "The so-called heaven and earth dharma body is to borrow the power of heaven and earth to cultivate oneself. This is something that manifestation realm experts dream of. Many manifestation realm experts spend their entire lives and still can't cultivate this body. But this person below, he is only in the saint realm, but he has cultivated this body. It can be said that he is almost invincible in the manifestation realm." Speaking up to here, she paused and said, "Young lord, this person can cultivate this body in the saint realm. This is very unusual." Yi Xian nodded and said, "I understand." Below, Mo Xie walked towards Shui Bai. Shui Bai stared at Mo Xie, his right hand tightly gripping the long spear in his hand. The long spear seemed to sense its master's intent and began to tremble violently. Mo Xie's expression was calm. He walked in front of Xue Bai, and Xue Bai suddenly thrust his spear forward. With one thrust, heaven and earth changed color. Pure power. Even a manifestation realm expert would find it difficult to resist this spear. However, at this moment, Mo Xie suddenly clenched his right hand. This clench seemed to grasp the world in his hand, and the surrounding space directly became illusory. In the next moment, he suddenly punched forward. Boom! In front of everyone's eyes, the long spear in Xue Bai's hand suddenly shattered. At the same time, he directly flew out and finally smashed into the burial sky Great Wall's wall. Puff! Blood slowly flowed out of Xue Bai's mouth. Mo Xie walked to the front of the wall. He did not attack Xue Bai, but looked up at Yi Xian on the wall. Come down. At this moment, everyone's eyes fell on Yi Xian. P.S. Recently, every update will be checked. If there are any typos or mistakes, everyone can leave a comment in the book review section, and I will correct it in time. I will also check every update. Thank you. Chapter 473. Challenge Yi Xian. Everyone's gaze fell on Yi Xian. Indeed, after Xue Bai's defeat, the only ones in Burial Sky Great Wall's younger generation that could fight were Yi Xian and Zhou Xingxing, who was still fighting. Zhou Xingxing, on the other hand, was still fighting. Moreover, Zhou Xingxing was ranked below Xue Bai. Therefore, the only one in Burial Sky Great Wall's younger generation that still had some hope was undoubtedly Yi Xian. On the city wall, beside Yi Xian, Lian Wanli said, "I'll go." As she spoke, she was about to go down the city wall, but Yi Xian pulled her arm at this moment. Lian Wanli looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and said, "He's looking for me, so naturally I'll go." As he spoke, he leaped down the city wall and walked in front of Xue Bai. He took out a healing fruit and handed it to Xue Bai. Xue Bai looked at Yi Xian and said, "Very strong." Yi Xian nodded, "I know." As he spoke, he turned around and walked towards Mo Xie. Mo Xie looked at the approaching Yi Xian and softly said, "Before, I thought Xue Bai was my opponent. Unfortunately, he disappointed me a little. Now, I hope." At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "What's the point of talking so much nonsense? Let's just fight." As he spoke, he suddenly raised his sword and charged at Mo Xie. What he hated the most was talking a lot before a battle. Yi Xian's speed was extremely fast. He instantly arrived in front of Mo Xie and slashed down. A very fast slash. However, Mo Xie didn't dodge, allowing Yi Xian's slash to land on his head. Boom! As the slash landed, Yi Xian's arms violently shook. At this moment, Mo Xie's fist suddenly landed on Yi Xian's abdomen. However, at this moment, numerous flying swords slashed at various vital points on Mo Xie's body. Pang! Yi Xian retreated rapidly, and with this retreat, he directly retreated to the bottom of the city wall. Several sword lights crisscrossed around Mo Xie's body. A moment later, several sword scars appeared on his body. Seeing this, the faces of everyone on the wall turned dark. The Dharma body of heaven and earth was an invincible existence. In the air, in front of endless sky, the hunchbacked elder smiled and said, "Swordsman? Over the years, other than the Sky Realm Swordmaster, there haven't been any good swordsmen in the never-ending star domain." As he spoke, he looked at endless sky. "Palace Master Endless Sky, how long do you think that swordsman can last?" Endless Sky remained expressionless. Her gaze was fixed on Yi Xian, and no one knew what she was thinking. Below, Yi Xian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and chuckled. He was starting to like this feeling. The feeling of battle and madness. What did he rely on to survive time and time again in Qing City? It was ruthlessness and madness. When two sides fought, there were many factors that determined life and death. And most importantly, it depended on whether you were ruthless enough, whether you were crazy enough. Yi Xian raised his sword and suddenly disappeared. A wisp of sword light flashed across the battlefield. The moment Yi Xian disappeared, Mo Xia slowly closed his eyes. In the next moment, he clenched his right hand forward. This clench directly grabbed a sword light, and then he lightly exerted force. Boom! The sword light shattered. However, at this moment, Yi Xian's soul suddenly left his body. In the next moment, Yi Xian's sword stabbed into Mo Xia's chest. When the sword stabbed into Mo Xia's chest, it was like stabbing into solid dark steel. Yi Xian's entire right arm went numb. Mo Xia was about to attack when his expression suddenly changed. He dodged backwards, and with this flash, his soul actually left his body. However, very quickly, his soul returned to his body. At the same time, he retreated 100 meters, pulling away from Yi Xian. Mo Xia looked at the distant Yi Xian. Your sword technique, so strange. In the distance, Yi Xian was silent. One sword soul setting. Yi Xian did not use the soul-suppressing sword, but instead used the one-sword soul-setting technique. Mo Xia cultivated the heaven and earth Dharma body, and his body was basically invincible. However, Yi Xian did not believe that his soul was invincible as well. His sword originally wanted to stop the opponent's soul, but he did not expect Mo Xia's reaction speed to be so fast. His soul left his body, causing his sword to stop the air. In the air, the hunchbacked old man across from Wei Yang Tian slightly frowned. This sword technique. Wei Yang Tian looked at the old man and lightly said, "Everything is possible, right?" The hunchbacked old man laughed, "Really? Then let us wait and see." After saying that, he looked at Yi Xian and Mo Xia below. Below, Mo Xia began to walk towards Yi Xian. His right hand was clenched tightly behind his back. An aura appeared out of nowhere. This aura was like a volcano that had accumulated for 10,000 years suddenly erupting. The moment it appeared, the surrounding space directly undulated. And with every step Mo Xia took, this aura would strengthen a little. The aura of heaven and earth. In the air, Mr. Bai suddenly said softly. His expression became increasingly solemn. The aura of heaven and earth. This was not borrowing the aura of heaven and earth, but controlling the aura of heaven and earth. This was extremely terrifying. In other words, although Mo Xia had not reached the manifestation realm, he already had the strength of the manifestation realm. Moreover, he was even more terrifying than the manifestation realm. A true monster. Mr. Bai's gaze fell on Yi Xian, a trace of worry and helplessness in his eyes. It had to be said that Yi Xian was also very outstanding, very outstanding. However, he was born in the wrong era. The geniuses born in the same era as Mo Xia were all tragic. That was what Mr. Bai thought in his heart. Below, the space around Yi Xian had already begun to crack due to Mo Xia's aura. Not only that, the aura enveloped Yi Xian, causing him to almost be unable to breathe at this moment. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly stabbed his sword into the ground. Boom! A powerful sword aura swept out from the sword in Yi Xian's hand. Sword aura. However, this sword aura was quickly suppressed by Mo Xia's aura. In the air, the hunchbacked old man chuckled. How can a single person's aura resist the aura of heaven and earth? Wei Yang Tian looked at Yi Xian below, his face a little gloomy. Below, after Yi Xian discovered that his sword aura was suppressed, he fell silent. At this moment, he thought of the plain-dressed woman. It was the first time he had seen the woman in a plain dress. The plain-dressed woman stood at the bow of the boat. With a shout, the river water was drained and condensed into her sword. Under her sword, everything in the world was so fragile. Yi Xian looked at the sword in his hand. It was a normal sword. Yi Xian looked at the sword in his hand. It was an ordinary sword. The sword is strong because of the person. The sword is strong because of the person. The sword is strong because of the person. If one was strong, even a blade of grass could destroy the heavens and earth. Yi Xian suddenly raised his head and looked at Wuxia in the distance. He tightly grasped the sword in his hand. At this moment, there was only one belief in his heart. Fight! Yi Xian suddenly raised his head and looked at the nearby Wuxia. In the next moment, a powerful sword aura swept out from his body. Apart from that, there was also a black and white sword intent. Good and evil sword intent. The sword intent that he had dispersed before appeared again. As these two sword intents appeared, a sword cry suddenly resounded through the sky. In the air, Wei Yang Tian for the first time, a smile appeared on her face. The aura of heaven and earth? As she spoke, she looked at the hunchbacked old man. Have you never heard of the saying that man can conquer nature? As cultivators, if we don't have the heart to defy the heavens, what's the point of cultivating? The hunchbacked old man was expressionless. It's just a mental breakthrough. So what? Wei Yang Tian looked down, then let us wait and see. The hunchbacked old man also looked down. Below, the sword aura that Yi Xian emitted was getting stronger and stronger. In the end, his sword aura had completely blocked Wuxia's powerful aura. Yi Xian raised his sword and walked towards Wuxia. In his hand, the immortal soul sword trembled violently. Wuxia glanced at Yi Xian. In the next moment, he suddenly leaped up. In the air, his right palm faced upwards. However, in the next moment, he suddenly slammed his palm down. Boom! When this palm landed, it was as if it was going to shatter the heavens and earth. A powerful force swept down from the sky. Everywhere it passed, the space cracked inch by inch. Below, Yi Xian's mouth curved into a sinister smile. He stomped his right foot and transformed into a sword light that soared into the sky. One sword to decide life and death. This time, he knew very clearly that if he lost, he would definitely die. This time, if he couldn't decide the opponent's life and death, then he would have to die. At this moment, there was only one thought left in Yi Xian's mind. Fight! As Yi Xian soared into the sky with his sword in hand, a sword cry reverberated through the sky. Under everyone's gaze, Yi Xian's sword tore through the air. Finally, his sword stabbed into Wuxia's palm. Boom! The heavens and earth violently shook. With the two of them as the center, the space within 1,000 feet instantly collapsed into a spider web shape. In front of Yi Xian, Wuxia coldly stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's sword was ultimately unable to pierce through his skin. However, the powerful force contained in Yi Xian's sword violently shook his body. The force was so powerful that he didn't dare to underestimate it. Wuxia's palm firmly blocked Yi Xian's sword. Suddenly, he abruptly grabbed Yi Xian's sword and slid forward. His palm slammed into Yi Xian's chest. However, practically at the same time, numerous flying swords directly slashed at Wuxia's vitals. Boom! Both of them rapidly retreated. As they retreated, Yi Xian put his fingers together and pointed forward. Chi! Streaks of sword light flew towards Wuxia like lightning. They were extremely fast and instantly arrived in front of Wuxia. Wuxia's palm faced forward. Stop! As his voice fell, all the flying swords were frozen in place. Spatial power. Wuxia's palm lightly pressed forward, go. As his voice fell, all the flying swords flew back and slashed straight at Yi Xian. Their speed was extremely fast. They weren't any slower than Yi Xian's flying swords. However, these flying swords had just arrived in front of Yi Xian and silently disappeared. Mo Xia looked at the distant Yi Xian and softly said, "I have to say, you're really tenacious. Moreover, it seems that the more you fight, the more powerful you become." As he spoke, his right hand slowly clenched. "Fortunately, I didn't underestimate you in the beginning. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would have suffered a great loss." The heaven and earth Dharma body didn't mean invincibility. Yi Xian's sword could already hurt him. And if he had underestimated Yi Xian in the slightest, this underestimation might have cost him his life. Never underestimate the enemy. This was his warning to himself. Mo Xia suddenly raised his right hand and looked at Yi Xian from afar. He contemptuously said, "It's time to end this." As his voice fell, his right hand suddenly opened. In an instant, the space around Yi Xian actually began to distort. In the air, Wei Yang Tian seemed to have seen something. Her expression changed and she was about to attack, but the hunchbacked elder blocked in front of her. Chapter 474. In the air, Wei Yang Tian looked at the hunchback elder. The latter said, "Palace Master, don't interfere in the fight between the younger generation." Wei Yang Tian frowned slightly. Just as she was about to make a move, she suddenly looked down at Yi Xian. The hunchbacked old man also looked down. Below them, the space around Yi Xian was distorting in a strange way. However, Yi Xian was completely fine at the center. Not only that, but the space around him was slowly returning to normal. The hunchback elder frowned slightly. How is this possible? There was also a trace of astonishment in Wei Yang Tian's eyes. Space. This time, Yi Xian did not use Space Dao Law. Instead, he purely used the power of space. After cultivating in adversity, his grasp and understanding of the power of space was completely different from before. This time, he was purely using the power of space around him to resist Mo Xia. Under Yi Xian's control, the space around him slowly returned to normal. In the distance, Mo Xia frowned slightly. Soon, the space around Yi Xian returned to normal. Mo Xia looked at Yi Xian. What a surprise! Your use of space has reached this level. Yi Xian raised his sword and walked towards Mo Xia. Cut the crap. Let's continue. With that, he stomped his right foot. Boom! The space beneath his feet shook. Yi Xian turned into a sword light and shot out. In the distance, Mo Xia clenched her right hand into a fist and punched out. Boom! The world shook violently. This punch forced Yi Xian to stop. However, the moment Yi Xian stopped, his soul suddenly left his body. At the same time, a sword slashed towards Mo Xia. Mo Xia, who wanted to take it head-on, suddenly changed his expression. In the next moment, his body shook and he flashed back 100 feet. This sword was a soul-fixing sword. Hence, Mo Xia did not choose to take it head-on. He did not dare to because this sword targeted the soul. His heaven and earth body was useless before this sword. His retreat gave Yi Xian a chance. As soon as Mo Xia stopped, several beams of sword light suddenly slashed his body. At the same time, Yi Xian appeared in front of him again. Then, he thrust his sword straight at him. This sword was aimed at the space between the eyebrows. It was still the soul-sealing sword. Mo Xia didn't choose to retreat again. His two hands clasped together and directly clasped Yi Xian's sword. At the same time, he pressed forward and slammed into Yi Xian's body. Bang! Yi Xian retreated rapidly. Mo Xia was about to follow up with another attack, but two sword lights suddenly appeared above his head. Bang! The sword light shattered. However, Wuxia still managed to forcefully retreat several meters. With this retreat, the distant Yi Xian pressed forward again. He was extremely fast and arrived in front of Wuxia in the blink of an eye. At the same time, he slashed at Wuxia's throat with the immortal spirit sword in his hand. Wuxia did not dodge and let Yi Xian's sword slash at his throat. However, his fist seemed to land on Yi Xian's abdomen at the same time. Bang! Yi Xian retreated rapidly. With this retreat, he retreated directly to the bottom of the city wall. Wuxia was just about to rush over when a few flying swords suddenly slashed at him, forcing him to stop in place. Wuxia looked at Yi Xian, who was at the bottom of the city wall. In the next moment, he disappeared. His entire body flashed past like a beam of light. In the distance, Yi Xian's expression changed slightly. He lightly tapped his feet and turned sideways. Wuxia's foot brushed against the edge of Yi Xian's abdomen and kicked the city wall. Bang! The city wall shook violently and cracked. However, it quickly recovered. Below the city wall, when Wuxia's kick missed, Yi Xian suddenly slashed horizontally. This sword slashed at Wuxia's abdomen. This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. Bang! The sword shook violently. Wuxia frowned slightly. His arm suddenly swept towards Yi Xian's head. Yi Xian's body bent backwards and directly dodged this punch. At the same time, several flying swords suddenly slashed at Wuxia's throat and forehead. Bang bang bang, the sword light shattered, but Wuxia was also forced back several meters. However, in the next moment, he suddenly disappeared. In the distance, Yi Xian's expression changed slightly. He held his sword with both hands and slashed forward. One sword soul setting. Seeing this sword, Wuxia, who had just rushed in front of Yi Xian, slightly changed his expression. His figure flashed backwards. This flash was a full 30 meters. Facing Yi Xian's one sword soul setting, he did not dare to take it head-on. However, he could still dodge it. In the distance, Yi Xian raised his sword and walked towards Wuxia. At this moment, his expression was grave. He had to admit that Wuxia was the strongest person he had ever seen in the young generation. Though the opponent did not dare to take his one sword soul setting, the opponent's speed and battle reaction were extremely fast. He could dodge this sword. As long as it was not one sword soul setting, the opponent dared to take it head-on. However, he could not keep using this one sword soul setting, because it consumed too much energy. In this battle, Yi Xian knew clearly that there were no shortcuts. He could only fight head-on. When he was dozens of meters in front of Wuxia, Yi Xian's right foot suddenly stomped down, and his entire body became a sword light that shot towards Wuxia. Almost at the same time, Wuxia suddenly disappeared. The two of them fought again. In the air, Wei Yang Tian and the hunchback old man silently looked down. Wei Yang Tian was expressionless, while the hunchback old man's expression was slightly gloomy. He never imagined that Yi Xian would be so tenacious and fight Wuxia to a standstill. Moreover, he noticed that Yi Xian was growing stronger the more he fought. In the battlefield, everyone was looking at Wuxia and Yi Xian outside the city wall. The two of them had already entered into close combat. Wuxia's physical body was invincible, her battle reaction speed was extremely fast, and her adaptability was terrifying. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's sword technique was sharp, and every strike was aimed at vital points. Especially his flying sword, Yi Xian's flying sword was truly too elusive. Every time it appeared, it was impossible to defend against. Looking at Yi Xian's flying sword, everyone in the battlefield was filled with fear. If it wasn't for Wuxia who had cultivated a heaven and earth body, no one could fight Yi Xian in close combat. Right now, Yi Xian was extremely terrifying in close combat. Boom! At this moment, a huge explosion suddenly came from below. As the explosion resounded, Yi Xian and Wuxia retreated rapidly. With this retreat, the two of them retreated nearly 300 meters. As Yi Xian retreated, flying sword after flying sword slashed towards the nearby Wuxia like bolts of lightning. Wuxia punched out with both fists. For a time, explosions resounded incessantly in the battlefield. Soon, Wuxia stopped. The sword flashes in front of him had all shattered. However, at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of him. Wuxia narrowed his eyes and suddenly disappeared, throwing a punch towards Yi Xian's chest. An extremely fast punch. However, at the moment he punched out, Yi Xian suddenly stabbed his sword towards his throat. This time, it was soul-setting strike. However, this time, Wuxia didn't dodge. Neither of them dodged. They were going to exchange lives for lives. Wuxia knew very well that if he dodged, it would be extremely difficult for him to kill Yi Xian. Meanwhile, it was the same for Yi Xian. He knew that if he dodged this punch, then he would be completely suppressed. Moreover, he would be crushed in terms of aura as well. At that time, he would definitely die. So, he couldn't retreat. Everyone in the surroundings held their breaths at the sight of this. This time, it might really be a matter of life and death. Under everyone's gazes, Yi Xian's sword stabbed into Wuxia's throat. Wuxia's body shook violently. At this moment, he was like a block of wood because his soul had been locked in place within his body. At this moment, he couldn't move at all. This chapter isn't finished. Please continue to the next page. At the same time, his soul was ceaselessly turning illusory. At practically the same time, Wuxia's fist smashed into Yi Xian's abdomen. Yi Xian's entire body instantly flew backwards like a kite with a broken string. In the air, Yi Xian's body began to crack inch by inch. Blood splattered everywhere. It was an incomparably terrifying sight. Finally, Yi Xian heavily smashed into the city wall behind him. Boom! The city wall violently shook and countless cracks appeared. Yi Xian laid on the ground as blood constantly flowed out of his body. Not long after, the ground beneath him was dyed red with blood. Yi Xian felt as if his entire body had been shattered, including his organs. He didn't even have the strength to move a finger. Yi Xian's eyes were tightly shut. In his mind, names kept appearing. Ling, Anlanxiu, Mo Yunqi, Jiangjiu, Bei Zhe. Thinking of these people, Yi Xian, who was about to fall unconscious, suddenly clenched his fists. In the next moment, a pile of purple source crystals appeared in front of his chest. Then, he automatically began to absorb these purple source crystals. He didn't want to die. He, Yi Xian, still didn't want to die. He wanted to live. The powerful desire to live caused Yi Xian to forcefully resist the urge to sleep. Because he knew very well that if he fell asleep, he would never wake up again. Yi Xian tightly clenched his teeth. His hands were also tightly clenched. This was the last bit of his strength. Live. For himself, and for his sister. In the distance, Wuxia's soul in his body began to flicker. Clearly, he was also forcefully protecting his soul. However, his soul was still slowly fading away. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before Wuxia's soul completely disappeared. At that time, his soul would truly be destroyed. The surroundings were incomparably quiet. Everyone was looking at Wuxia and Yi Xian, the two most monstrous people in the world. In the sky, Mr. Bai suddenly stood up and looked at the hunchbacked old man above. Will the battle between the two of them end here? The hunchbacked old man looked at Wuxia below and fell silent. After a moment, the hunchbacked old man nodded. Clearly, he didn't want Wuxia to die here. However, at this moment, Wuxia's soul suddenly softly said, "It's not over yet." Everyone looked at Wuxia below. Wuxia looked at Yi Xian on the ground and softly said, "Our battle is not over yet." The moment she finished speaking, the space beside her suddenly split open. In the next moment, a demon beast suddenly leaped out. Evil Qilin. Seeing this, Mr. Bai and the others' expressions changed. Wuxia softly said, "It's my demon beast, it doesn't count as an outsider helping." As he spoke, he looked at the distant Yi Xian. "It's over." The moment he finished speaking, the evil Qilin charged straight at the nearby Yi Xian. Seeing this, Mr. Bai and the others' expressions changed. They were about to attack, but the Moke clan's experts all blocked in front of them. Beside Wei Yang Tian, the hunchbacked old man stared at her. The moment she moved, he would immediately stop her. However, Wei Yang Tian had no intention of attacking. Below, just as the evil Qilin was about to reach in front of Yi Xian, a black light suddenly flashed out of Yi Xian's body. In the next moment, a demon beast appeared in front of Yi Xian. Emperor Hound. On the ground, Yi Xian softly said, "Brother Emperor, kill it." Emperor Hound shook its head. It looked at the evil Qilin with a strange smile on its face. "This is a female one. This kill, hee. Yi Xian. P.S. Asking for votes. No. I'm not asking." End of this chapter. Chapter 475. A female. Yi Xian's face darkened. This fellow wouldn't betray him, would it? However, he couldn't care less at the moment. All he wanted to do now was lie down and recuperate. He still couldn't feel his own body. This time, his injuries were really serious. More seriously than ever before. Everyone in Buried Sky City breathed a sigh of relief when the Emperor Hound appeared. However, they were curious as to why Yi Xian had a demonic beast. Aside from curiosity, they were also a little worried. The Emperor Hound looked much worse than the evil Kirin. It wasn't as big as the evil Kirin either. However, the Emperor Hound didn't fear the ancient demonic beast in front of it at all. The Emperor Hound. It was also a demonic beast from the ancient times. In the air, opposite Wei Yang Tian, the hunchbacked elder frowned as he looked at the Emperor Hound. After a while, he looked at Wei Yang Tian. "What demonic beast is this? Why have I never seen it before, old man?" Wei Yang Tian said calmly, "The world is vast, and you and I are both insignificant." The hunchbacked elder frowned slightly. Below, the evil Kirin in front of the Emperor Hound suddenly roared. It glared at the Emperor Hound with a murderous look in its eyes. The corner of the Emperor Hound's mouth cracked open, revealing a row of fangs as sharp as blades. After a moment of silence, the two demonic beasts disappeared from where they stood. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion resounded. Soon, the two demonic beasts were engaged in a fierce battle. Both of them were extremely powerful, and they both relied on their physical bodies. It was a head-on clash. As soon as the battle began, the surrounding space began to tremble violently, as if it was about to shatter. It was extremely frightening. Seeing that the Emperor Hound wasn't any weaker than the evil Kirin, Mr. Bai and the others breathed a sigh of relief. In the air, Wei Yang Tian suddenly looked at the hunchbacked elder not far away. "Since the juniors can't decide a winner, let us do it." The hunchbacked elder said softly, "All right. I also want to see how much Palace Master Wei Yang's strength has grown over the years." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly disappeared. Wei Yang Tian also disappeared with him. In next to no time, numerous deafening explosions resounded incessantly in the distant sky. Below, Mr. Bai suddenly looked at Emojio and said, "Come on. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished. In the distance, the experts from the Moke clan also disappeared. The battle began. This time, it was a true all-out war. Under the city wall, Yi Xian was still lying quietly, and the war army and others had rushed out. Lian Wanli stood beside Yi Xian. She held the azure dragon saber and just stood there. Zhuo Qing stood quietly beside Mo Xia in the distance. Mo Xia had forcefully withstood Yi Xian's soul-setting sword. Even now, his soul was still a bit illusory. Fortunately, it hadn't completely dissipated. Whether it was Yi Xian or Mo Xia, they were both still alive, but both were heavily wounded. Beside Yi Xian, Lian Wanli looked around and said softly, "How intense." At this moment, she suddenly realized that the war between the Great Cloud Empire and the other countries in the Azure world was simply child's play. She lowered her head and looked at Yi Xian. Actually, she didn't leave the Azure world to find Yi Xian. She just wanted to leave that place and take a look in the starry sky. As it turned out, she had made the right choice. Because if she stayed in the Azure world, she would trap herself to death. At this moment, an expert from the Moke clan suddenly rushed towards Yi Xian. Obviously, he wanted to take this opportunity to kill Yi Xian. Lian Wanli glanced at that person. The next moment, she threw the saber in her hand forward. Chi! The saber tore through the sky, tearing everything apart. Boom! In the distance, that expert from the Moke clan was pushed back hundreds of meters by this saber. Lian Wanli clenched her right hand and the azure dragon saber returned to her hand. In the distance, none of the experts from the Moke clan dared to come over. Lian Wanli lowered her head and looked at Yi Xian. "How is it?" Yi Xian said softly, "I won't die yet." Lian Wanli nodded and looked around. At this moment, the battle had reached its climax. Both sides were dying. Neither side had a huge advantage. It could only be said that they were evenly matched. Lian Wanli raised her head and looked at the distant starry sky. She knew that if the two of them decided a winner, it would be the end. Who was stronger? Far away in the void, a series of explosions rang out incessantly. The battle was intense. Lian Wanli retracted her gaze and looked at the monarch hound and evil Qilin in the distance. The two evil beasts were also fighting fiercely. It was a stalemate. Lian Wanli still didn't make a move. She just stood there quietly because if she left, Yi Xian would definitely die. This continued for about 2 hours. More and more people died around them. There were people from both sides. Lian Wanli realized that no one escaped from either side. They were all fighting to the death. At this moment, Lian Wanli suddenly raised her head and looked at the sky. There, an expert from the never-ending star field fell from the sky. A Creation Realm expert. Now, there were already Creation Realm experts dying. Lian Wanli gripped her saber and remained silent. Yi Xian was still absorbing the purple origin crystals. What he needed to do now was to heal his injuries as soon as possible. On the other side, Mo Xia was also rapidly recovering her soul. Both of them were fighting for time. Meanwhile, Zhuo Qing and the Earth Fiend were guarding Mo Xia with all their might. After about a market, Yi Xian sat cross-legged while Mo Xia's soul returned to her physical body. However, neither of them made a move. Yi Xian's physical body had yet to fully recover, while Mo Xia's soul had yet to completely merge with her physical body. Moreover, her soul had yet to fully recover. At this moment, boom! In the distant horizon, an explosion suddenly sounded. The next moment, the entire sky began to tremble violently as if there was a huge earthquake. Lian Wanli raised his head and looked at the sky. Soon, the sky began to crack layer by layer. After a while, the entire sky suddenly shattered and turned pitch black. However, the space quickly recovered. At this moment, two people appeared in the sky. It was the hunchbacked elder and Wei Yong Tian. Wei Yong Tian was expressionless, while the hunchbacked elder's expression was somewhat solemn. There were two reasons for this solemn expression. One was that Wei Yong Tian was powerful, and the other was that the person who should have appeared did not appear. Wei Yong Tian looked at the hunchbacked elder and was about to make a move. At this moment, the hunchbacked elder suddenly said, "Wait, Palace Master Wei Yong." Wei Yong Tian frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" The hunchbacked old man glanced at his surroundings, and his gaze gradually turned cold. At that moment, the surrounding space suddenly trembled violently. As the space trembled, threads of red light that were as thin as needles and thread suddenly seeped out from the surrounding space. Wei Yong Tian frowned slightly when she witnessed this scene. She waved her hands, and space shattered. However, those threads of red light still remained. Wei Yong Tian's frown grew deeper. She suddenly clenched her fists tightly, and then her figure spun. Bang! A powerful stream of air appeared around her, and it ceaselessly resisted the red light. However, it didn't take long for the stream of air to be corroded. Wei Yong Tian's expression changed slightly. She waved her hand, and a multicolored jade belt suddenly flew out. In the next moment, the jade belt started to spin madly and resist the red light. However, the jade belt actually started to be corroded bit by the red light. The hunchbacked elder who stood before Wei Yong Tian had withdrawn a dark gold shield as well, and it floated around him. However, the shield wasn't able to resist the red light, and it started to be corroded as well. The hunchbacked elder's expression was extremely unsightly when he witnessed this scene. "That's cosmic rays." As he spoke, he glanced around. These people are like the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. Across from the hunchbacked elder, endless sky coldly scanned the surroundings. "You're the one who attracted them." The hunchbacked elder turned to the right. "Great Sovereign, why haven't you come out yet?" "Huh!" Loud laughter suddenly rang out from the distance. Along with this voice, a middle-aged man walked out from the space. The middle-aged man was wearing a white robe, and behind him, there were 6 red-robed elders, each of them wielding a blood-red staff. Other than that, there was a strange red flame floating around them. Most conspicuous of all was the blood-red halo of light beneath their feet. It looked like a formation. Wei Yong Tian narrowed her eyes when she saw these 6 people. Divine Sorcerer. Divine Sorcerer. The highest level of Divine Sorcerer in the Outlander territory could be said to be the strongest in the Outlander territory. Every single one of these people possessed supreme secret techniques passed down in the Outlander territory. She hadn't seen a single Divine Sorcerer the last time she went to the Outlander territory, and she had thought it was strange. She hadn't expected that these people would appear here. The white-robed middle-aged man smiled. "Great eyesight, Palace Master Wei Yong." Moreover, Palace Master Wei Yong was actually able to resist these cosmic rays. As expected of the strongest expert in this starfield. Meanwhile, the hunchbacked elder spoke abruptly, "Great Sovereign, you're going back on your word." The Great Sovereign looked at the hunchbacked elder and smiled, "Going back on my word? I only promised to join forces with you to destroy Wei Yong Tian, but I never said I wouldn't destroy your Moke clan." As he spoke, he glanced at the two of them and smiled. "To be honest, if the two of you hadn't fought to the point of mutual destruction, we wouldn't have dared to act rashly." Wei Yong Tian slowly clenched her right hand and was about to attack when the Great Sovereign suddenly smiled, "Palace Master Wei Yong, don't waste your strength. These 6 divine sorcerers have exhausted all their strength and used the Outlander Source Spring as the formation core. As long as the 6 of them don't die, the cosmic rays will be endless. You won't be able to stop them." As he spoke up to here, he suddenly looked at Yi Xian below. He sized up Yi Xian and chuckled lightly. Is this the Yi Xian who possesses a supreme treasure? Behind the great sovereign, a saint sorcerer nodded. It's him. We've investigated this person, and there seems to be a mysterious expert behind him, but we don't know the specific identity. The great sovereign chuckled. To be able to possess such a treasure, this person is naturally not simple. Alright, let's cut the crap. Kill this person and that Moke clan's Wuxia. These two can't be left alive. As the great sovereign's voice fell, two afterimages suddenly tore through the sky and descended. One flashed towards Yi Xian's position, and the other towards Wuxia's position. Chapter 476. Seeing this scene, Wei Yang Tian and the hunchbacked old man's expressions changed. However, as soon as the two of them attacked, countless cosmic rays appeared around them and enveloped them like a net. Below, the Moke clan and the never-ending Starfield experts stopped simultaneously. Mr. Bai and the Moke clan's patriarch, Mo Tianqi, took the lead and stood in front of the two black shadows. Boom! As two explosions rang out, the two black shadows were forced to a stop. However, many men in black suddenly appeared in the surroundings below. These men in black wielded long swords and rushed toward Yi Xian and Wuxia. Seeing this scene, the war army and the others changed their expressions, especially the war army and Baldy, who rushed toward the men in black. On the other side, Zhou Qing, Earth Fiend, and the others blocked in front of Wuxia. However, due to the intense battle just now, Zhou Qing, Zhang Jun, and the others were not in peak condition at all. Hence, the moment they clashed, Zhou Qing, Zhang Jun, and the others were immediately suppressed. In front of Yi Xian, Lian Wanli stood quietly with the azure dragon saber in her hand. All of a sudden, Lian Wanli slashed to the right with the long saber. Boom! The space cracked, and an afterimage retreated rapidly from the space. Lian Wanli glanced coldly at the afterimage. You want to kill him? Have you asked this king? As soon as she finished speaking, she was about to rush over with the saber. However, at this moment, she seemed to have thought of something and quickly stopped. Then, she returned to Yi Xian's side with the saber. In the distance, the black shadow suddenly disappeared. Lian Wanli raised the saber and slashed. Boom! An explosion resounded, and the black shadow was pushed back again. However, the next moment, more than a dozen experts in black appeared around Lian Wanli. Lian Wanli frowned slightly. Fight me one-on-one if you can. The dozen or so people ignored her and rushed towards her. Lian Wanli looked at Yi Xian. Take care of yourself. As soon as she finished speaking, she raised the saber and slashed forward. Boom! The black-robed man at the forefront was sent flying by Lian Wanli's slash. However, in the next moment, a long sword appeared at the back of her neck. Lian Wanli's reaction was extremely fast. She dodged to the side and directly dodged the sword. At the same time, she swept the azure dragon saber in her hand. Boom! The three black-clothed men were sent flying. But in the next moment, numerous black shadows surrounded Lian Wanli. At the same time, a man in black holding a sword suddenly appeared behind Yi Xian and stabbed the back of Yi Xian's neck. Fast, accurate and ruthless. As the sword stabbed into the ground, a smile appeared on the black-clothed man's face. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. However, in the next moment, his expression changed drastically. He was about to retreat when a flying sword slashed through his throat. The black-robed man glared at Yi Xian, his eyes filled with disbelief. At this moment, Yi Xian stood up slowly and turned to look at the man in black. Are you surprised? Are you surprised? The black-clothed man glared at Yi Xian. Even in death, he didn't understand why Yi Xian was fine. Yi Xian's palm suddenly opened. In the next moment, an aura sword flew out from his palm. Dozens of meters away, the head of a black-clothed man fighting with Lian Wanli suddenly flew off. Seeing this, the black-clothed men fighting Lian Wanli changed their expressions and quickly retreated. Lian Wanli looked at Yi Xian. Done? Yi Xian nodded. Done. As he spoke, he looked at the nearby Emperor Hound. At this moment, the Emperor Hound wasn't fighting the Black Qilin. The Black Qilin had already returned to Wuxia's side. However, its eyes were still on the Emperor Hound and Yi Xian. Its eyes were still filled with hostility and viciousness. The Emperor Hound returned to Yi Xian. This evil Qilin's bloodline is very pure. It's orthodox. Yi Xian said, between it and you, whose bloodline is higher? The Emperor Hound fell silent for a moment before it said, it's about the same. Therefore, there's no bloodline suppression between us. As it spoke, it looked up into the sky. Kid, you seem to have a new enemy. A new enemy. Yi Xian looked up into the sky. At this moment, Wei Yang Tian and the hunchbacked elder from the Moke clan were still trapped. Yi Xian's expression instantly darkened when he saw Wei Yang Tian trapped. Things are getting serious. In the sky, the white-robed middle-aged man sized up Yi Xian and smiled. Monstrous indeed. With the speed of this flying sword, there probably aren't many people of the same rank who can resist it. As he spoke, he turned around. Didn't you want to see the geniuses of the never-ending star region? Come out. As soon as he finished speaking, the space nearby suddenly split open, and then a man and a woman walked out. The man wore a black robe, his long hair draped over his shoulders, and a sheathed saber hung from his waist. Meanwhile, the woman beside him wore a tight-fitting lotus leaf dress. Her lips were red, and her teeth were white. She was very beautiful. The man's gaze descended onto Yi Xian and Wuxia. You choose. The woman beside him looked at Yi Xian. Him. As soon as she finished speaking, she floated down very slowly like a snowflake falling from the sky. Yi Xian frowned slightly when he saw this. The Emperor Hound beside him said, Do you want to fight? Yi Xian said softly, I won't. Can I? The Emperor Hound said, I don't think so. That woman is here for you. Yi Xian was just about to speak when Lian Wanli suddenly said, Ben. This chapter isn't over. Please continue to the next page. Your Majesty. Yi Xian looked at Lian Wanli. Lian Wanli blinked. Your Majesty loves to hit women. As soon as she finished speaking, she raised her saber and soared into the sky. The Emperor Hound looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian took out a pile of purple origin crystals and began absorbing them madly. Healing. He wanted to properly heal now because he realized that he was in a dangerous situation. Very dangerous. Especially when never-ending heaven was trapped. The situation was very serious. Yi Xian began healing while the Emperor Hound stood guard by his side. Under such circumstances, many people would definitely want Yi Xian to die. On the other side, Zhuo Qing, who was beside Wuxia, also charged towards the black-robed man. Be it Yi Xian or Wuxia, both of them needed to recuperate at this moment, because their current combat power was undoubtedly very weak. In the sky, the white-robed middle-aged man glanced at Yi Xian and Wuxia, and then he looked at Wei Yang Tian and the hunchbacked old man. Wei Yang Tian's face was expressionless. The rainbow ribbon around her was about to be destroyed by the cosmic rays. The hunchbacked old man was the same. His dark golden shield was already turning illusory. The white-robed middle-aged man turned to look at a god-sorcerer. Hurry up. The god-sorcerer nodded slightly. In the next moment, she started chanting silently. It didn't take long for the sky above the burial sky great wall to tremble violently. Right after that, the space above the burial sky Great Wall suddenly cracked open, and countless cosmic rays shot out from within. The expressions of everyone here changed at the sight of this. If the cosmic rays were allowed to descend, the entire burial sky Great Wall would instantly be reduced to ashes. Moreover, everyone here would die. Besides Wei Yangtian and the others, who else could stop the cosmic rays? No one. Yi Xian had a solemn expression as well. Brother Emperor Hound, can you stop it? The Emperor Hound thought for a moment and said, I can escape. Yi Xian was speechless. The Emperor Hound gazed at Yi Xian. Are you going to flee? Yi Xian glanced at the war army and Baldi who were still fighting in the distance, and he fell silent. The Emperor Hound spoke solemnly, Big brother, we really can't beat them. Yi Xian spoke softly, do you think they'll let me go? The Emperor Hound fell silent. Because a part of the reason they'd appeared here was to look for Yi Xian. So, anyone could flee, but Yi Xian couldn't. No matter how he fled, they wouldn't let him go. Meanwhile, Yi Xian stood up and looked up into the sky. He spoke softly, move aside. I'm going to unleash my ultimate move. The Emperor Hound was speechless. P.S. Save as much as you can for the 15th, end of this chapter. Chapter 477. The Emperor Hound and Lien Wanli moved to the side. Yi Xian lifted his head to look at the sky. Looking at the endless cosmic rays, he knew there was no turning back this time. He had to fight to the death. Yi Xian was about to summon the pagoda when a woman suddenly appeared above Yi Xian. The woman wore green clothes and had a small cloth bag at her waist. Yi Xian was stunned when he saw this woman. She was the painter that he'd met when he'd first entered the heaven domain. Why is she here? Yi Xian's mind was filled with questions. In the air, Master Painter glanced at the horizon. A moment later, she took out a black ink stone from her small cloth bag. Then, the black ink stone rushed into the sky. In an instant, the entire horizon was covered in darkness. The darkness was like ink that covered the entire sky. At the same time, the black ink blocked all the cosmic rays. The great sovereign's gaze fell on the painter, and his eyes were solemn. The 6 divine wizards also looked at the painter. The painter looked up at Wei Yangtian, who was trapped in the sky, and smiled, I'm late. She was about to attack when the great sovereign suddenly appeared in front of her. The great sovereign looked at the painter, I presume your excellency is that painter. The painter smiled, that's me. The great sovereign smiled, please enlighten me. As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his palm, and a speck of light silently condensed in it. It didn't take long for the light to grow larger and larger, until it engulfed him and the painter. On the other side, Wei Yangtian's hands suddenly shook. Rumble. The sky shook violently, and the cosmic rays began to tremble violently. The 6 divine wizards' expressions changed, and they hurriedly formed hand seals and started chanting madly. It didn't take long for the space around Wei Yangtian to tremble violently, and strands of mysterious energy converged towards Wei Yangtian. Meanwhile, the hunchbacked old man in front of Wei Yangtian suddenly pressed his hands down. Rumble. A rumbling sound suddenly rang out in the sky, and then space began to crack inch by inch. The 6 divine wizards exchanged glances. In the next moment, they gathered together and formed triangular hand seals while chanting something. Soon, a huge golden sigil appeared above endless sky and the hunchbacked old man. Rumble. Beams of golden light shot out from the seal, and soon, the space around unending sky and the hunchback old man returned to normal. At the same time, the beams of golden light continued to shoot towards them. Wei Yangtian raised his palm to block, and the golden radiance was blocked. However, the golden rays seemed to be endless as they shot towards endless sky and the hunchbacked old man in a frenzy. Right at this moment, the hunchbacked old man who stood not too far away from Midnight Heaven suddenly said, "Palace Master Midnight, I'll hold them back. You deal with this formation." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly appeared in front of Endless Heaven. In the next moment, he suddenly pressed his palms together and pushed them upwards. Boom! The heavens and the earth shook violently as a powerful force forcefully blocked all the beams of golden radiance. Wei Yong Tian didn't hesitate at all. Her figure shook, and then she vanished. In the next moment, numerous explosions resounded incessantly from within the formation. The expressions of the 6 divine wizards changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and one of them turned to look at the nearby expanse of white light. "They're coming out." Rumble. The white light exploded into pieces, and it didn't take long for it to disperse completely to reveal a figure that had retreated 300 m away. This person. It was the Great Exalt. The Great Exalt stared fixedly at the painter. "You're stronger than I imagined." The painter grinned. "You're not as weak as I imagined." The Great Exalt spoke softly, "Is that so?" As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand, and 3 teleportation formations suddenly appeared on his right. In next to no time, the space around them started to tremble violently, and it didn't take long for 2 old men to walk out from the teleportation formations. Behind these 2 old men were almost 100 people. These 100 people all held long spears in their hands and wore black iron armor. Their bodies exuded a powerful aura. In addition, countless monster beasts flew out from the spatial passageway. These monster beasts were huge, and their auras were extremely powerful. An army. This was an army invasion. Seeing this scene, the painter frowned. "Which star field are you from?" The Great Exalt smiled. "Sky River Star Field." Hearing this, the painter's frown deepened. "Sky River Star Field is very far from here. Why are you here?" Saying this, she suddenly looked down at Yi Xian. "For him?" The Great Exalt smiled. "Not exactly." The painter said softly, "I see. You must have learned that the Moke clan is at war with my never-ending star field, so you came here to reap the benefits." The Great Exalt smiled. "Esteemed painter, with your strength, where can't you go? Why stay here and fight for the never-ending star field, isn't that right?" The painter smiled. "No matter what, this is our homeland. How can we let outsiders trample on it?" As soon as she finished speaking, she opened her palm, and a black brush silently condensed in it. The Great Exalt's expression instantly became solemn when he saw this brush. The Great Exalt slowly clenched his right hand. "Kill." As soon as he finished speaking, he charged at the painter. As for the other 2 old men, they charged at Endless Sky and the hunchbacked old man instead. Because at this moment, the grand formation was on the verge of shattering under Endless Sky's bombardment. Endless Sky frowned slightly when she noticed the 2 old men charging at her, and then she raised her hand and slapped it forward. Rumble. The sky trembled violently. In the next moment, Endless Heaven and an old man retreated repeatedly. As they retreated, countless bolts of red lightning shot towards Endless Heaven like flaming serpents. Endless Sky smashed her fist forward. Bang! The bolts of lightning were blasted apart. However, at this moment, a powerful force suddenly swept out from the space in front of her, and then it crushed down towards her. Endless Sky's expression was icy cold, and she raised her hand and slapped down. Bang! The force was instantly blasted apart. However, countless bolts of flames shot towards her from all directions. Endless Sky turned to look at the 6 divine wizards in the distance. In the next moment, she stomped her right foot against the ground, and then she shot towards them. Everywhere she passed, the space in her path immediately shattered. The expressions of the 6 wizards changed, and they suddenly pulled their hands together. In an instant, an enormous fiery red shield of light appeared in front of Endless Sky. Endless Sky immediately swung her fist. Bang! The shield of light cracked apart. However, Endless Sky herself was blasted over 100 m back as well. The wizard in the lead stared fixedly at Endless Sky and spoke in a low voice, "This woman's strength is truly rare. If she hadn't exhausted herself in that battle with that expert from the Moke clan, then even the joint forces of the 6 of us wouldn't have been able to stop her." An old man by his side had a solemn expression as well. "She's very strong. Has she activated a forbidden technique?" "Why?" The wizard in the lead shook his head. "It's not time yet." As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian below, and soon, he frowned. Below, in front of Yi Xian, Baldi, the war army, and Lian Wanli were holding back the black-armored figures. However, the 3 of them were firmly suppressed. These black-armored figures were truly strong. Meanwhile, the Emperor Hound and the Black Qilin were holding back the countless monster beasts. This time, the 2 monster beasts had chosen to work together. If they didn't, only death awaited them. In the air, the wizard in the lead said in a low voice, "We can't let this drag on. Don't hold back." The old man beside him nodded slightly. In the next instant, he swiped his right hand to the side, and the space split open. Soon, something seemed to be sprinting towards them from the depths of the space. Soon, a stone giant ran out of the space. This stone giant was the size of a small mountain, and its eyes were blood-red and emitted crimson flames. When it appeared, it slammed its hands forward. Rumble! The entire horizon shook violently. The wizard in the lead pointed at Yi Xian below. "Kill!" Hearing the wizard's voice, the stone giant lowered its head to look at Yi Xian below. In the next instant, it directly charged towards Yi Xian's position. This charge caused the entire space to tremble violently. It was incomparably terrifying. Below, when she saw the giant charging over, Lian Wanli, who was fighting with her opponent, had a change of expression. She immediately gave up on the opponent in front of her, turning around to charge at the giant. However, the moment she turned, a spear pierced through her shoulder. Chi! Blood splattered everywhere. Lian Wanli didn't care. She sped up and arrived in front of the stone giant. The stone giant's right hand smashed down. Lian Wanli raised her saber and slashed down. Boom! The stone giant's fist smashed down, and Lian Wanli instantly retreated several hundred zhang. As soon as she stopped, a mouthful of blood flowed out of her mouth. Lian Wanli looked up at the stone giant and said softly, "So powerful." As she spoke, she held the azure dragon saber in her hand and threw it into the distance. Chi! The saber tore through the sky, tearing everything apart. In the distance, the stone giant suddenly stopped, turned around, and smashed down with its fist. Bang! This fist smashed down, and the azure dragon saber was directly blasted back. Not far away, Lian Wanli's pupils constricted. She dodged to the side, and the azure dragon saber slashed at the nearby city wall. Bang! The city wall trembled violently and instantly cracked. However, it didn't shatter. Right at this moment, Lian Wanli suddenly turned around, and a huge fist smashed towards her. There was no way to dodge. Lian Wanli suddenly raised her arms in front of her. Bang! Lian Wanli was instantly blasted back, and then she smashed heavily against the city wall. On the ground, Lian Wanli's mouth flowed continuously with blood. At the same time, her arms had been shattered, and her bones could be seen. Right at this moment, the stone giant suddenly charged towards Yi Xian. Seeing this scene, Lian Wanli's expression changed slightly. She charged above Yi Xian, and was about to raise her saber when she discovered that her arms couldn't move. Lian Wanli was stunned, and then she looked at the descending fist, and she was slightly at a loss. Why did this queen come to throw away her life? As she spoke up to this point, she looked at Yi Xian below, and said softly, "Dying for this fellow, it's not worth it at all." At this moment, the stone giant fist descended. Bang! Chapter 478. Just as the giant stone fist was about to land, a sword suddenly blocked the giant stone fist. The person holding the sword was none other than Yi Xian. The moment Yi Xian came into contact with the powerful force of the fist, his expression changed drastically. In the next moment, his whole body fell. As he fell, his left hand grabbed Lian Wanli's waist and dodged to the side, retreating to the bottom of the city wall. Yi Xian gently placed Lian Wanli on the ground. Looking at Lian Wanli on the ground, Yi Xian's expression gradually turned cold. They wanted him dead. From Qingcheng until now, there were countless people who wanted him dead. It was as if these people would never die. Once one died, another would immediately jump out. And because of him, his former friends were implicated, his younger sister was implicated, and now Lian Wanli was implicated as well. Thinking of this, Yi Xian's expression gradually turned ferocious. Yi Xian gently wiped the blood from the corner of Lian Wanli's mouth. "Watch carefully, I'll help you vent your anger." As his voice fell, he turned to look at the giant stone man in the distance. The latter was also looking at him. In the next moment, the giant stone man leaped and punched at Yi Xian. With a punch, the space immediately turned illusory. Yi Xian's right hand tightly gripped the sword, his expression becoming increasingly ferocious. When the fist was about 10 feet away from him, he suddenly stabbed out with his sword. One sword to decide life and death. Wang! As the sword struck out, the sound of the sword reverberated through the sky. Yi Xian's sword directly pierced the giant stone man's fist. A head-on collision. Boom! A loud explosion resounded. Following that, the giant stone man retreated rapidly. At the same time, its giant fist began to crack inch by inch. Yi Xian suddenly leaped and slashed down with his sword. The giant stone man looked up at Yi Xian. With a fierce roar, it swept its left hand across the sky. With this sweep, the space where the arm passed directly cracked open. In the air, Yi Xian wielded his sword with both hands and slashed down. Chi! This slash directly chopped off the enormous stone arm. At the same time, numerous flying swords slashed at the enormous stone figure's throat. However, the flying swords weren't able to break through its defenses. But at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly flew to the giant's head with his sword, and in the next moment, he slashed horizontally. Chi! The giant's head was instantly sent flying. Yi Xian landed on the ground, a trickle of blood slowly seeping from the corner of his mouth. Injury. In the previous fight with Wuxia, his wounds were too heavy. Moreover, his wounds hadn't completely healed yet. But at this moment, he didn't have time to care about this injury. His life was more important. Yi Xian slowly walked back to Lian Wanli. Lian Wanli asked softly, "Why was the power of your sword so much stronger than before?" One sword to decide life and death. Yi Xian smiled bitterly and shook his head. Actually, he was slightly depressed because the might of this sword strike was related to his anger. The angrier he was and the more he wanted to kill, the stronger this sword strike would be. On the other hand, under normal circumstances, the might of this sword strike would be ordinary. Kid! At this moment, the Emperor Hound's voice suddenly came from the distance. Yi Xian quickly turned to look at the Emperor Hound. At this moment, the Emperor Hound and the evil Qilin were being surrounded by countless demons. Although the Emperor Hound and evil Qilin were powerful, they couldn't withstand being ganged up on. The Emperor Hound suddenly said angrily, why aren't you coming to help? Yi Xian smiled sheepishly, then turned to look at Lien Wanli. I'll take you to a place to rest. After speaking, he directly stored Lien Wanli into the prison pagoda, then turned and charged towards the countless demons in the sky. Inside the prison pagoda, Lien Wanli looked around curiously. At this moment, Xiaoling appeared in front of her. Lien Wanli blinked and said, "How cute." Xiaoling As Yi Xian charged towards the Emperor Hound, countless flying swords suddenly tore through the sky. For a time, shrill cries resounded through the sky. In the clouds, the Divine Master in the lead suddenly turned his head and looked down. When he saw that Yi Xian was still alive, his expression became extremely ugly. At this moment, he suddenly turned his head, and at this moment, endless sky was already in front of him. The holy mage's expression changed drastically when he saw this, and he suddenly pushed his hands forward. The ball of flames that floated around him transformed into a wave of flames that drowned Never-Ending Sky. Never-Ending Sky smashed his fist forward. Bang! The flames were instantly shattered. Meanwhile, the holy mage had already retreated over 1 kilometer away. At the same time, 2 black-robed old men appeared in front of him. The 2 old men stared fixedly at Never-Ending Sky. Needless to say, Never-Ending Sky's strength had truly exceeded their expectations. This wasn't even Never-Ending Sky's peak state. If he was at his peak state, then they probably wouldn't be able to stop him even if they joined forces. Besides Never-Ending Sky, the other hunchbacked old man from the Moke clan was extremely terrifying as well. He'd forcefully blocked all the cosmic rays. Otherwise, Never-Ending Sky would have been unable to separate herself. The 2 old men exchanged a glance, and then they looked at the 6 holy mages behind them. The holy mage in the lead remained silent. One of the black-robed old men frowned slightly. "Yan Sheng, why are you still hesitating?" The holy mage named Yan Sheng hesitated for a moment, and then he looked at the 5 people behind him. Activate the restrictive spell. As soon as he finished speaking, the 6 of them formed hand seals and started chanting silently. It didn't take long for an enormous red formation to appear in the sky, and then the sky instantly darkened. The ground was dyed blood red. In the distance, Never-Ending Sky frowned slightly as she looked at the red formation, and then she slowly clenched her right hand. At this moment, an enormous blood-red eye suddenly appeared within the red formation, and it looked directly at Never-Ending Sky. In the next moment, a pillar of blood-red light burst out from the eye. Everywhere it passed, space was instantly plunged into pitch-black darkness. Meanwhile, Never-Ending Sky opened her palm and spun it lightly. A powerful force suddenly swept out from the center of her palm. Bang! Deafening rumbles resounded incessantly above the clouds in the heavens and the earth. Unending Heaven was forced to retreat explosively, and with this retreat, he retreated a full 10,000 feet. Meanwhile, the 2 black-robed old men were about to attack when Yan Sheng suddenly said, "Let's deal with Yi Xian first." Deal with Yi Xian first. Both of them recovered from their shock. Their main objective this time wasn't just to destroy the Moke clan and the Never-Ending Starfield, but also to get the treasure in Yi Xian's possession. Both of them turned around and flashed down. Down below, Yi Xian seemed to sense something, and his expression changed. He was just about to attack when a Gui appeared in front of him, and then a blood-red scythe shot into the sky. In midair, one of the old men suddenly slapped his palm down. Bang! Space warped, and a Gui was pushed back repeatedly before he could even touch the old man. But in the next moment, he vanished mysteriously, and when he reappeared, he was already in front of the black-robed old man. At the same time, a blood-red scythe silently appeared at the old man's throat. Hiss! A ripping sound resounded. However, the old man had vanished on the spot, and a Gui suddenly turned around and swung his scythe down. Bang! A Gui was blasted backward. However, the moment he flew back, his scythe flew out of his hand and slashed at a black shadow. Bang! The black shadow shattered, and the old man revealed his true form. There was a long, bloody gash on his chest. Seeing this, the black-robed old man's face turned ugly. Nearby, a Gui looked at Yi Xian and said, "Let's go." Yi Xian was about to speak, but the two old men suddenly vanished. A Gui's expression changed, and he charged forward with his scythe. When he saw this, Yi Xian didn't hesitate at all, and he swung his sword swiftly. Hiss! A ray of sword light tore through the sky. But it didn't take long for the ray of sword light to shatter. At the same time, a black-robed old man appeared in front of Yi Xian, and then he slammed his fist at Yi Xian's face. The powerful force caused the space around Yi Xian to crack inch by inch. In the face of the power of these people, the space was so fragile. Yi Xian held his sword with both hands and swung it forward. He didn't dare to hold back at all. The sword light was as dazzling as the sun, but it only lasted for a moment. The ray of sword light instantly shattered, and Yi Xian retreated repeatedly. He hadn't even stopped when the black-robed old man appeared in front of him again, and then the old man slapped his palm at his face. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly grinned. The next second, the sword in his hand quietly changed to the soul-suppressing sword. Yi Xian's sword stabbed the old man's palm. Bang! Yi Xian was instantly sent flying. However, the black-robed old man didn't move. His eyes were wide open, and they were filled with terror. But it didn't take long for the terror in his eyes to vanish. At this moment, he couldn't move. Soul fixation. In the distance, Yi Xian held his sword with both hands. Blood flowed incessantly from the corners of his mouth, and his chest was dyed red with blood. He knew very well that his strength was far inferior to the black-robed old man, so he could only rely on the soul-suppressing sword. Of course, it wasn't just the soul-suppressing sword, it was the soul-suppressing sword and the soul-fixation sword. If it was just the soul-suppressing sword alone, it wouldn't be able to stop the old man's soul. Fortunately, the soul-suppressing sword and the soul-fixation sword were still effective against the old man. Otherwise, he would really be dead. Even though he wasn't dead, he felt as if his entire body had been sucked dry after using that attack. Moreover, he could clearly sense that Soul had become much weaker. At this moment, Soul's voice resounded in Yi Xian's mind. "Young lord. You can't use that sword technique with me anymore. I need to rest." In next to no time, Soul's voice vanished completely. On the spot, Yi Xian's face was solemn because he realized that Soul's voice was very weak. Obviously, that attack hadn't just consumed a great deal of his strength, it had consumed a great deal of Soul's strength as well. Because he still couldn't fully utilize Soul's strength, he needed Soul's cooperation most of the time. Therefore, every time he used Soul, it consumed a great deal of Soul's strength. At this moment, a Gui was suddenly pushed back. After being pushed back, the other black-robed old man turned to look at Yi Xian, and he stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "What did you do to him?" Yi Xian was silent. The black-robed old man's face turned ferocious, and he directly charged at Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly picked up the soul-suppressing sword and pointed it at the black-robed old man. "Old man, I'm not joking. If I hit you with this sword, you might die." The black-robed old man. Chapter 479. The black-robed elder stopped in front of Yi Xian. The black-robed elder stared at Yi Xian. To be more precise, he stared at the soul-suppressing sword in Yi Xian's hand. He frowned when he saw the sword. A creation-grade artifact. Yi Xian grinned. "Good eye." The black-robed elder said in a low voice, "Impossible. Even a creation-grade artifact can't kill him in one hit. He looked at Yi Xian. You must have some trump card. Yi Xian's expression changed. He said angrily, I don't have any trump card. Get over here. The black-robed elder stared at Yi Xian. Do you think the old man will be fooled by you? Yi Xian flew into a rage out of humiliation. He charged at the black-robed elder with his sword in hand. The black-robed elder's expression changed. He didn't attack. Instead, he retreated hundreds of meters to put some distance between him and Yi Xian. Yi Xian was about to chase after the black-robed elder when he thought of something. He almost forgot that he couldn't defeat the black-robed elder. Opposite Yi Xian, the old man in the black robe glanced at Yi Xian with a hint of wariness in his eyes. The divine sorcerer in the air shouted angrily, What are you waiting for? Kill him now. The black-robed elder looked at the sky. The divine sorcerer and the others couldn't stop Wei Yang Tian. The black-robed elder's expression darkened. He looked at Yi Xian again. Yi Xian was swinging the soul-suppressing sword. The black-robed elder clenched his right fist. A Guo appeared next to Yi Xian. The black-robed elder's expression darkened when he saw a Guo. Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior, attack. Hearing Yi Xian's words, a Guo was slightly taken aback. In the next moment, he rushed out with his sickle in hand. The black-robed old man squinted his eyes. He did not choose to retreat. His body shook and he threw a punch at a Guo. Boom! With a punch, a Guo was sent flying backward. Almost at the same time, a flying sword suddenly appeared in front of the black-robed old man. The sudden appearance of the flying sword caused the black-robed old man's face to change, as he crossed his arms in front of him. Boom! The sword light shattered, but in the next moment, a few more flying swords slashed at him from different angles. The black-robed old man's expression turned savage, as he slapped his hands towards his sides. Rumble! The surrounding space trembled violently. Yi Xian's flying swords were all annihilated. But as soon as the flying swords were destroyed, a Guo appeared in front of the black-robed elder. At the same time, a blood-red scythe slashed at the black-robed elder's throat. Perfect combination. The black-robed old man could not dodge at all. He grabbed the scythe with both hands, but at this time, a flying sword slashed at his head. Boom! The black-robed old man retreated hundreds of feet away. At the same time, his head was split open by the sword. But he did not die, only his body became a little illusory. Beside a Guo, Yi Xian said in a low voice, Not dead? A Guo said in a low voice, At this level, there are many ways to preserve one's life. Yi Xian nodded slightly, You fight close combat, I'll attack from afar. A Guo disappeared on the spot, and when he reappeared, he was already in front of the black-robed old man. The black-robed old man's pupils shrank, and without hesitation, he turned around and fled. He knew very well that if he continued to fight, he would definitely die. Especially Yi Xian's flying sword, it was too disgusting. The black-robed old man was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, he was back in the sky. But at this time, a shadow suddenly appeared above his head, and in the next moment, a powerful force swept across the sky. Down! The black-robed old man's expression changed drastically, and he swiftly raised his hands to block. Rumble! The sky trembled violently as the black-robed old man descended swiftly. Meanwhile, a ray of light flashed. Hiss! The ray of light pierced through the black-robed old man's throat, and then his head instantly flew into the air while blood sprayed out like a fountain. The black-robed old man's soul was about to flee, but a flying sword was even faster and instantly pierced through his soul. At the same time, the flying sword absorbed his soul. Yi Xian gestured with his right hand, and the soul-suppressing sword returned to his grasp. He raised his head and looked towards the distance, and there was a man standing there. It was Wuxia, and he was the one who'd attacked the black-robed old man just now. At this moment, it seemed like Wuxia's injuries had recovered slightly. Wuxia gazed at Yi Xian, and then he fell silent for a short moment before he suddenly pointed at the 6 divine wizards in the sky. "Support me." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly stomped his right foot against the ground. Bang! Wuxia soared into the sky and charged towards the 6 divine mages. Meanwhile, Yi Xian lightly pressed 2 fingers together, and then a sword of energy silently condensed. Both he and Wuxia were very clearly aware that even though the Moke clan and the never-ending Starfield were fighting to the death, they had no choice but to join forces now. Because all of them would die if they didn't. A wisp of ridicule arose on the corners of Yan Sheng's mouth when he saw Wuxia charge towards him. A tiny Saint Realm cultivator. Right at this moment, Wuxia's speed instantly rose explosively, and he arrived in front of Yan Sheng in the blink of an eye. Yan Sheng's expression changed slightly when he witnessed this scene. He suddenly shook his left hand, and then a strand of dark blue flames swept out from his palm. Wuxia didn't dodge, and he allowed the palm to strike his chest. However, he smashed his fist against Yan Sheng's chest as well. Bang! Wuxia was blasted flying while Yan Sheng retreated repeatedly. At the same time, a flying sword silently arrived in front of Yan Sheng. Yan Sheng's expression changed drastically, and he made a grabbing motion with his left hand from afar. This grasp directly grabbed the flying sword, but in the next moment, there was another flying sword behind the flying sword. The divine sorcerer's expression changed drastically, and he hastily dodged to the side. However, it was still a little too late, and the flying sword directly chopped down on his left shoulder. Chi! The divine sorcerer's entire arm was instantly sent flying. At this moment, Wuxia suddenly appeared in front of him again. Yan Sheng was horrified when he saw this scene. At this moment, he had no choice but to give up on fighting against unending sky. He hastily withdrew all his energy, formed a seal with both hands, and chanted softly. Soon, the space in front of Wuxia suddenly trembled, and powerful forces continuously seeped out from the space. Wuxia, who had just arrived in front of him, was instantly sent flying. However, at this moment, Yan Sheng suddenly turned around. Not far away, Unending Sky was walking towards him, and Unending Sky was carrying 2 bloody heads in his hands. Yan Sheng's expression instantly darkened when he saw this scene. Previously, the 6 of them had barely been able to restrain Unending Sky, but just now, he had been restrained by Wuxia and Yi Xian's joint forces. It was this moment that had directly caused them to collapse. Unending Sky had lost control of himself. At the same time, after 2 of the 6 of them died, the formation could no longer be maintained. The hunchbacked elder from the Moke clan in the distance was also no longer restrained, and he immediately walked towards them. On the other side, the great sovereign was still fighting Master Painter. Both of them were shrouded in white light, and the battle situation was unknown. As for below, the Unending Star region's experts had already joined forces with the Moke clan, and their army had already been stopped. Yan Sheng was silent, and no one knew what he was thinking. At this moment, Unending Sky tossed out his hands, and the 2 bloody heads instantly shattered. The bloody head shattered instantly. She walked towards Yan Sheng, but the latter remained silent. Unending Sky was just about to attack when Yan Sheng suddenly turned around and looked into the distance. The foreign realm doesn't want that treasure anymore. Unending Sky raised his head and looked into the distance. Somewhere there, the space suddenly split open, and soon, a middle-aged man walked out. Seeing this, Unending Sky frowned slightly. These enemies came one after another, and there was no end to them. The middle-aged man gazed at Yan Sheng and said with a smile, "The foreign realm has given up on this treasure." As compensation, the Moke Galaxy and Unending Star region will belong to the foreign realm in the future. My Sky River region only wants that treasure. Yansheng said softly, "Thank you, Heavenly Sovereign." The middle-aged man smiled, and then he gazed at the nearby unending sky and said with a smile, "Palace Master Unending, please enlighten me." Unending Sky's face was expressionless. Suddenly, she vanished. The smile on the middle-aged man's face widened, and then his body turned illusory in the next moment. It didn't take long for both Unending Sky and the middle-aged man to vanish. Yansheng's expression was extremely solemn. Unending Sky's strength was truly too shocking. If she hadn't exhausted too much of her strength in the battle with the hunchbacked elder from the Moke clan, then no one here would be able to kill her in a one-on-one battle. The hunchbacked elder from the Moke clan gazed at Yansheng, and he was about to attack when an afterimage suddenly appeared in front of him. In the next moment, the space around him turned illusory, and then rays of cold light shot incessantly towards him. The hunchbacked elder's face fell when he saw this. Obviously, the other party had come prepared, and they wanted to restrain him and Unending Sky. After a moment of silence, the hunchbacked elder's voice suddenly resounded in the sky. "The Moke clan will fight to the death. Fight to the death. Fight to the last man." At this moment, all the members of the Moke clan looked up into the sky. Wuxia was looking at the sky as well. His face was expressionless, and his right hand was clenched tightly. Zuoqing and the Earth Fiend stood by Wuxia's side. On the other side, Yi Xian stood silently. Not far from him were the War Army, Baldi, and some genius experts from the Great Wall of Buried Heavens. At this moment, all of them were heavily injured. Both sides had fought terribly earlier, and the sudden appearance of the Foreign Land and Sky River sector's experts had caused them to suffer heavy losses. In terms of overall strength, the Neverending sector and the Moke clan combined couldn't compare to the Foreign Land and Sky River sector. Especially those powerful demonic beasts. The Emperor Hound and the Evil Qilin were having a hard time resisting them. Fortunately, they had these two demonic beasts to support them. Otherwise, the Moke clan and the Neverending sector would have been finished long ago. At this moment, Yansheng suddenly looked down at Yi Xian. Behind him were 3 divine sorcerers. 4 peak-level super experts. Yansheng looked down at Yi Xian and the others and said softly, "Give it all you have." As soon as he said that, the 3 sorcerers behind him suddenly took out 3 teleportation arrays. Soon, countless experts rushed out of these teleportation arrays. In an instant, the entire sky turned pitch black. Below, Wuxia suddenly looked at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian also turned to look at Wuxia. Wuxia said, "Can you still use that sword of yours?" Yi Xian was slightly stunned. Soon, he knew that Wuxia was talking about the soul-suppressing sword, so he shook his head. Wuxia nodded. With a flick of his finger, a sword fell in front of Yi Xian. The sword was about 4 feet long, dark gray in color. The blade was extremely thin, and the tip was extremely long. On the tip of the sword, there was a dot of black light. Aside from that, there were 2 pitch-black eyes on both sides of the hilt. Yi Xian was puzzled. Wuxia said softly, "Wuxia sword, one of the Moke clan's ultimate treasures. It has the power of Moke and the Moke sword. I'll lend it to you." As he spoke, he paused and said, "I'll lend it to you. Yi Xian." Chapter 480. The Moke Sword. Yi Xian looked at the sword in front of him, stunned and confused. Wuxia looked up at the sky and said softly, "If we don't join forces, none of us will survive." Behind Wuxia, Zuoqing and the other Moke clan experts were silent. The never-ending Starfield experts on Yi Xian's side were also silent. join forces. At that moment, both the Moke clan and the never-ending Starfield experts understood one thing. If they didn't join forces, only death awaited them. If they joined forces, there might be a way out. Although they had once been enemies, they had to join forces for survival now. Yi Xian held the Moke sword in front of him. Instantly, a powerful force surged out of the sword and gathered in his body. Yi Xian's body trembled. He opened his eyes abruptly. There were two blood-red pupils in his eyes. Yi Xian's expression changed. He quickly let go of the sword and looked at Wuxia. Wuxia said softly, "The Moke sword. Since the first ancestor of the Moke clan, no one has been able to use this sword. This sword has the power of the Moke and the intent to kill. Since the first ancestor, no one in the Moke clan has been able to use this sword. The first ancestor's soul gave this sword to me, hoping that I could use it. However, I'm not interested in swordsmanship, so." As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. "I'll lend it to you for now." Yi Xian was silent. The moment he held the sword, he felt a powerful force enter his body. But at the same time, he felt like he wasn't himself. That force wanted to enslave him. And in that instant, his mind was filled with murderous intent. It wanted to kill everything. Wuxia suddenly said, "You don't dare to take it?" Yi Xian shook his head. "We're all going to die. Why wouldn't I dare to take it?" As soon as he finished speaking, he held the Moke sword. Boom! A powerful force instantly surged into Yi Xian's body. In an instant, Yi Xian's eyes opened again. Within his eye sockets were two blood-red pupils. Yi Xian gripped his sword tightly in his right hand, his body trembling uncontrollably. Next to Yi Xian, War Army said in a deep voice, "Brother Yi, are you okay?" Yi Xian said with a trembling voice, I want to kill someone." War Army, beside Yi Xian, Wuxia looked up at the god sorcerers and said softly, "Kill." As soon as he finished speaking, he lightly stomped his right foot and soared into the sky. Earth Fiend and the others followed closely behind, but Zuoqing did not follow them. On Yi Xian's side, Baldy and the others did not want to be outdone. They all soared into the sky. Yi Xian was still in his original position. At this moment, he was almost unable to control that power. He realized that his mind was a little chaotic. At this moment, Zuoqing, who was next to Yi Xian, suddenly said, "Kill. Kill to get rid of that power." Yi Xian directly soared into the sky and charged toward the foreign experts in the sky. In the sky, God Sorcerer Yan Sheng looked at Wuxia and the others who were charging toward him expressionlessly. Behind him, countless experts rushed toward Wuxia and the others. Wuxia, who was charging at the forefront, suddenly reached out with his right hand and grabbed, boom. The space in front of him directly distorted and became illusory. The next moment, a powerful force swept out from this space. In an instant, the entire sky was filled with screams. Yan Sheng looked at Wuxia and was about to make a move. At this moment, Mr. Bai and the Moke clan's Mo Tian Chi suddenly appeared in front of him. They naturally couldn't allow Yan Sheng to attack Wuxia, Yi Xian, and the others. Because Wuxia, Yi Xian, and the others were currently unable to resist Yan Sheng. Mr. Bai and Mo Jiao looked at each other. This chapter is not over, please continue to the next page. They directly rushed toward Yan Sheng. Yan Sheng's eyes gradually turned cold. Sacrificial array. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly pulled his hands and a fiery red flag appeared in front of him. Behind him, 3 fiery red flags also appeared in front of the 3 god sorcerers. In the next moment, the 4 fiery red flags directly became illusory. At the same time, the surrounding space suddenly heated up. Waves of fire seeped out from the surrounding space and drowned Mr. Bai, and Mo Tian Qi Yansheng turned to look at one of the god sorcerers. "You go deal with that Yi Xian." The god sorcerer nodded slightly. In the next moment, he disappeared on the spot. At the same time, a wave of fire fell from the sky and headed straight for Yi Xian. Below, Yi Xian seemed to have sensed it and suddenly looked up. In the next moment, he suddenly stomped his right foot and transformed into a ray of sword light that shot into the sky. Just like that, a ray of fire and a ray of sword light collided in the sky in the most brutal way possible. Boom! The entire sky trembled. Countless rays of sword light and fire shook the sky, and Yi Xian was shaken down by the powerful force. On the ground below, boom! Yi Xian landed on the ground, and the entire ground shook violently. At this moment, his body had cracked and was still covered in flames. However, a powerful force was continuously gathering towards his body. Mo-ku force. This force was constantly repairing Yi Xian's body, but it was also constantly corroding his mind. If it wasn't for his strong mind, he would have been enslaved by this force. In the sky, the god sorcerer stared at Yi Xian. He didn't expect Yi Xian to be able to resist his attack. One had to know that his realm was several levels higher than Yi Xian's. Monster. Not only was Yi Xian a monster, but Mo Xia was also a monster. The god sorcerer turned to look at Mo Xia in the distance. At this moment, Mo Xia was crazily slaughtering. Apart from the experts of the older generation, almost no one could stop him. Apart from that, the evil Qilin and Emperor Hound were also extremely terrifying. After the two evil beasts joined forces, they were able to stop most of the demons. If this continued, if the Sky Sovereign and Great Sovereign couldn't win, their situation would become extremely bad. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly transformed into a ray of sword light and shot into the sky. The god sorcerer withdrew his thoughts and looked down at Yi Xian. Wherever the sword light passed, the space was torn apart inch by inch. The god sorcerer formed a seal with both hands. In the next moment, the space in front of him began to violently tremble like waves. When Yi Xian rushed in front of him, he suddenly looked at Yi Xian. Forbidden space technique, freeze. As soon as he said that, the space around him and Yi Xian suddenly trembled and rapidly shrank, trapping Yi Xian in place. The god sorcerer coldly looked at Yi Xian. "You're still too young." At this moment, the space suddenly returned to normal. Yi Xian's sword pierced straight into the space between the god sorcerer's eyebrows. Seeing this, the god sorcerer's expression changed drastically. He didn't expect Yi Xian to be able to break through his forbidden technique so easily. In his opinion, this was simply impossible. However, he didn't have time to think so much. He pulled his hands forward and an illusory shield appeared in front of him. Yi Xian's sword arrived. Rumble. The illusory shield shook violently and then cracked. Yi Xian held the sword and suddenly spun. Boom! The shield suddenly shattered, and the sword pierced straight through. However, at this moment, the god sorcerer had already retreated hundreds of feet. At the same time, one after another fire arrows were launched at Yi Xian like a storm. In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly roared angrily. The next moment, he held the sword and swung it forward. In an instant, countless sword lights shot out from the Moke sword. This chapter is not over. Please continue. They shot out. Rumble, rumble, rumble. For a moment, there was a series of explosions. In the distance, the god sorcerer suddenly formed a strange seal with both hands. Soon, tens of thousands of fire arrows appeared around him. The god sorcerer looked at Yi Xian in the distant sea of fire. He suddenly formed a seal with both hands. 10,000 flames burning the heavens. As soon as he said that, the fire arrows suddenly pierced through space and shot toward Yi Xian in the distance. In the distant sea of fire, Yi Xian suddenly raised his head. Countless sword lights shot out from his eyes. However, this time, the sword lights were gray in color. A wave of sword lights swept out and instantly destroyed the fire arrows. The god sorcerer was about to attack when Yi Xian suddenly stomped his right foot. Pust! A ray of sword light flashed across the battlefield. The god sorcerer's pupils suddenly constricted. In the next moment, a thin layer of fire appeared all over his body. At this moment, Yi Xian was already behind the god sorcerer. Yi Xian stood ramrod straight. There was a drop of blood on the tip of the moke sword in his hand. Behind Yi Xian, the god sorcerer looked forward in disbelief. He was still forming a seal with both hands, and a powerful force was surging around him. How did he die? Of course he knew. At that moment, Yi Xian's speed instantly increased by at least 5 times. He was less than 100 feet away from Yi Xian just now. At such a short distance, the 5 times speed instantly took his life. Just a little bit more. If Yi Xian had been a little bit slower, even just a little bit, he would have been able to block this fatal sword strike. Unfortunately, it was just this little bit that cost him his life. Gradually, the god sorcerer's gaze dissipated. At this moment, a sword suddenly entered the god sorcerer's body. Soul-suppressing sword. In an instant, the god sorcerer's soul was directly devoured. At this moment, Soul's somewhat excited voice sounded in Yi Xian's mind. Young master, this person's soul and mental strength are extremely powerful. If I devour 2 more, I will definitely be able to greatly improve. Moreover, I will be able to unlock new moves. In the air, Yi Xian held the sword in his hand tightly. At this moment, he still had a trace of rationality, so he could naturally understand the soul-suppressing sword's words. However, he already felt that he could not suppress the moke force and the desire to kill. Kill. Right now, his mind was filled with the thought of killing. At this moment, the soul-suppressing sword returned to Yi Xian's body. Young master, the power in that sword does not belong to you. Remember, do not be controlled by it. Otherwise, young master will be enslaved by the sword. Enslaved by the sword? Yi Xian was stunned, and then he asked, "What do you mean?" Soul said in a low voice, "A person can enslave the sword, and the sword can also enslave a person. Young master, remember, do not be enslaved by the sword. Otherwise, it will control you to attack the people closest to you and completely cut off all your thoughts." At this point, she paused slightly, and then she said, "If young master is controlled, it is very likely that he will personally kill your sister." No. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly roared angrily, "Motherf ***, how dare it?" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly picked up the moke sword and roared like a wild beast, "You better keep a low profile." The moke sword. P.S. Recently, I've been writing a fanfic. The fanfic will be combined with the main text, and it can be considered as explaining some things about the Great Sword Realm. As for the fanfic, whose fanfic do you want to see? Because the big shots in the Great Sword Realm all have their own lives, and there are many things that they haven't explained clearly. I will read your messages and suggestions carefully. End of this chapter. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.